Hey friends! Glad you're here at Harryverse X. We've cooked up something special. What if Zeus and Hera found Harry in the cupboard and raised immortal god of sky and power? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the King. The rain over Little Whinging had been falling since sunset, the kind of cold, indifferent October rain that didn't care what night it was or what had just happened in a cottage in Godric's Hollow. It fell on the neat rows of identical houses on Privet Drive with the same mechanical patience it fell on everything else: gutters, garden gnomes, a tabby cat sitting very still on a garden wall, watching. The street was quiet. It was always quiet on Privet Drive. The neighbors prided themselves on that. None of them noticed the bundle on the doorstep of number 4. None of them noticed the letter tucked into the blanket, or the lightning bolt shape on the forehead of the sleeping child inside it, or the fact that the child's breathing was perfectly steady and calm in a way that seemed almost unnatural for something so small left alone in the dark on the coldest night of the year. And none of them noticed the two figures standing at the end of the street. They looked, at a glance, like a well-dressed couple out for a late evening walk, the man tall and broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a dark coat that moved slightly even when there was no wind, the woman beside him straight-backed and composed, with dark hair pinned precisely, wearing deep green that made her look like she'd stepped out of a painting from a different century. They walked with the unhurried ease of people who had never once in their existence needed to rush anywhere, because the world had always waited for them. Zeus, king of Olympus, lord of sky and thunder, paused at the corner of Privet Drive and tilted his head slightly, the way a wolf tilts its head when it hears something beneath the audible range. "You feel that," he said. It wasn't a question. Hera stood beside him, her dark eyes scanning the street with the slow, thorough attention she gave to everything. "I felt it 3 streets back," she said. "I thought it was residual." "It's not residual." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "It's concentrated." She paused, searching for the right word, which was unusual enough that Zeus looked at her. Hera never searched for words. "It's old," she said finally. "Older than us." Zeus looked down the street toward the bundle on the doorstep of number 4. From this distance it was just a small shape wrapped in something light-colored, barely visible in the dark. But the feeling coming off it was extraordinary, like standing near the edge of a thunderstorm and feeling the charge build in the air, except the charge wasn't electricity. It was something that preceded electricity. Something that preceded naming. "Sacrificial magic," he said quietly. "Yes. Someone died for it." "Someone died for him," Hera corrected, and there was something in her voice that made Zeus go still. "There's a difference. The magic isn't on the child. The magic is the child." It was absorbed completely. Whatever happened tonight, she stopped walking. They were 20 feet from the doorstep now, and up close the child was visible, round-faced, dark-haired, impossibly small, sleeping in a carrier basket with a letter tucked beside his cheek like a bookmark. "Whatever happened tonight," Hera said again, "that child should be dead." Zeus crouched down in front of the basket with the particular grace of a being who didn't need to crouch, who could simply look down from any height and see perfectly well, but chose to, because some things deserve to be met at eye level. He looked at the child for a long moment. The rain fell around them but not on him. Zeus had redirected it without thinking about it. The boy's forehead. A cut, fresh but already sealed, shaped like a bolt of lightning. Zeus stared at it. "Hera," he said. "I see it. That's not a coincidence." "Nothing involving us ever is," she said, and she crouched beside him, and they were both quiet for a moment, the king and queen of Olympus, looking at one sleeping child in a basket on a doorstep in Surrey, while the rain fell around them in a perfect circle. Then Hera reached out and picked up the letter. She read it in silence. Zeus watched her face, a thing most people never got to do, because most people weren't watching Hera's face when she read. They were watching her composure, which was armor so well fitted it looked like skin. But Zeus had been watching her face for longer than Surrey had existed, and he saw the moment something shifted behind her eyes. Not softness, exactly. Something more dangerous than softness. Recognition. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it. To whom it may concern at number 4, Privet Drive. The boy's name. The parents' names. Lily and James Potter, killed last night. The explanation, compressed and careful and conspicuously short on detail, the way all letters written by people who feel guilty about what they're doing tend to be short on detail. He needs a safe home among family. And then, at the bottom, in the cramped handwriting of a man who had made a great many enormous decisions and was accustomed to having them obeyed, he must stay here. His protection depends on it. Please understand. Zeus set the letter down on the doorstep. He looked at the boy again. At the scar. At the impossible stillness of that small face, peaceful in the way things are peaceful when they've been through something catastrophic and come out the other side simply because there was nowhere else to go. They're going to put him in this house, Zeus said. Yes. With people who don't want him. Hera was looking at the dark windows of number 4 with an expression Zeus recognized very well. It was the expression she wore when she encountered something she considered a fundamental violation of the correct order of things. It was not a pleasant expression to be on the receiving end of, as a great many people throughout history could have confirmed. The woman inside, Hera said, is his mother's sister. She knows about magic. She's afraid of it. She's spent 20 years pretending the other half of her family doesn't exist because it made her feel small. A pause. She will not be kind to him. You can tell all that from here. I can tell all that from the way she keeps her garden, Hera said flatly. Everything in it is controlled to the point of cruelty. Nothing allowed to grow past a certain height. Everything trimmed back the moment it becomes interesting. She looked at Zeus. She'll do the same to him. Zeus was quiet. The rain continued its indifferent work on everything outside the circle of stillness around the basket. A car passed at the far end of the street, headlights sweeping over the hedgerows. An ordinary night in an ordinary place, and at the center of it, this boy who had already survived something that should have been unsurvivable. The old man's protection spell, Zeus said. The blood magic. It's real. It would work. It would work, Hera agreed. It would keep him alive. In a cupboard. The word landed between them like a stone. Zeus looked at the house again. He was genuinely, in that moment, doing what he almost never did. He was thinking carefully, weighing outcomes with the kind of thoroughness that his reputation didn't always suggest he was capable of. He thought about blood magic and old prophecies and the plans of a very clever old man who had left a child in the rain. He thought about what kind of person survived a childhood in a cupboard and what it cost them. He thought about the lightning bolt scar and what it meant that it looked exactly like what it looked like. Then he thought about something else entirely. When Cronus swallowed our children, he said, what did I always say about it, after we'd won? Hera looked at him. You said the worst evil is the one committed against the defenseless, and it should never be made to look like necessity. Yes. A long moment. Hera, he said. Pick him up. She already had. She hadn't waited for him to finish the sentence, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She had lifted the boy from the basket with the careful, decisive confidence of someone who'd made up her mind before the conversation started and was simply waiting for Zeus to get there too. The child stirred slightly at being moved, made a small sound, and then settled against her shoulder with the absolute, unquestioning trust that belongs only to the very young, who haven't yet learned that the world requires credentials before it offers comfort. Hera stood there for a moment holding him, and Zeus watched her face again. There it was. Beneath the armor. Brief and brilliant and entirely real. We're not telling Dumbledore, she said. Absolutely not, Zeus agreed. And we're not telling him about the prophecy until he's old enough to decide for himself what to do with it. Agreed. And no one on Olympus calls him a pet project or an experiment or anything similar, or I will personally, Hera. Zeus stepped beside her and looked down at the boy in her arms. Up close, the scar was stark against pale skin, and the boy's eyes had opened slightly, heavy with sleep but open, unfocused, the deep green of new growth in spring. They blinked at Zeus with perfect, unconcerned curiosity. Zeus felt something he didn't have a word for. He'd felt love before, plenty of times, in plenty of forms, some of which he was not proud of. He'd felt pride and possession and passion and the complicated tenderness of watching things you made go out and make their own mistakes. But this was different. This was something that arrived fully formed, like a fact, like a law of physics, not built but discovered. The boy yawned. Enormous for a face that small. Then closed his eyes again. "Hello," Zeus said quietly. "I'm going to be your father now. We can discuss the terms when you're older." Hera gave him a look. "He's one. He'll remember the intention, not the words." Zeus straightened up. "Grab his things." "He doesn't have things. He has a letter and a blanket." "Then grab those." He paused. "And leave the letter." "Leave it? Let Dumbledore think he arrived." Zeus looked at the doorstep, at the empty basket, then back at his wife and the sleeping child. "By the time anyone figures out what happened, it won't matter." Hera considered this, then nodded once. She set the letter back on the doorstep, neatly. She tucked the blanket around the boy with a precision that somehow managed to be tender anyway. And then they walked back to the end of Privet Drive, turned the corner, and were gone, and the rain closed back in over number 4 like nothing had ever happened, like no one had ever been on that doorstep at all, like the boy who was supposed to grow up small and frightened and full of other people's shame had simply ceased to exist. He didn't cease to exist, of course. He just went somewhere else. Harry James Potter grew up on Olympus. And Olympus, it should be said, was wonderful. Not in the way postcards are wonderful, or in the way theme parks are wonderful, where the wonder is manufactured and wears off by Tuesday. Olympus was wonderful the way lightning is wonderful, raw and enormous and slightly terrifying and completely alive, the kind of place that made you feel like something was about to happen at all times, because something always was. The mountain floated above the clouds on the days it felt like floating. On the days it didn't, it sat in the sky like it had always been there and always would be, which was true, and it knew it. The palace that crowned the mountain was a sprawl of white marble and gold light in spaces that didn't entirely obey the rules of Euclidean geometry, which Harry had accepted as normal before he was old enough to know what Euclidean geometry was. He grew up running through corridors that changed length depending on who was walking them. He grew up eating meals at tables where the food appeared when wanted. He grew up waking up in the morning to a sky that his father was personally responsible for, which meant that on the mornings Zeus was in a good mood it was heartbreakingly blue, and on the mornings he was not. Harry learned early to bring him coffee before saying anything else. He was not the only child on Olympus, there were always minor gods and demigods and divine children of one kind or another passing through, but he was the only one who was Zeus and Hera's, which was a distinction everyone around him was acutely aware of and which Harry himself paid almost no attention to, because it was simply the water he swam in. "You're going to break the column," Hera said, not looking up from the scroll she was reading. She was sitting in the garden that adjoined the main hall, and Harry, aged 7, was standing 10 feet away, sparking lightning between his fingers with the casual focus of a boy who'd been doing it for approximately 6 months and still found it enormously satisfying. "I'm not near the column," Harry said. "You're also about to accidentally call a rainstorm because you're distracted. Finish the pattern before you lose it." Harry looked down at his hands. She was right, he'd let the charge drift sideways while he was arguing, and it was starting to pull the humidity in the surrounding air. He brought it back, walked the lightning through the shape Hera had shown him, not a bolt, not raw discharge, but a controlled pattern, a signature, the way every god's power had a signature, and released it cleanly upward into the open sky. A crack of thunder, precise and clean, rolled out over the mountain. In the hall behind them, Zeus's voice carried out, "That's my boy. Don't encourage carelessness." Hera called back. "That wasn't careless. That was excellent. Harry grinned and sat down on the garden wall. His hair, perpetually chaotic, had been further disturbed by the discharge. His eyes, green, brilliantly green, something Zeus had never quite gotten used to, because they looked like Lily Potter's eyes if Lily Potter had had lightning in her, were bright with satisfaction. He had a thin scar on his forehead that his parents had never explained fully except to say that it was old and it was a mark of something important, and Harry had accepted this with the same easy practicality he accepted most things on Olympus. "What's it a mark of?" he'd asked, once, at age 6. "Survival," Hera had said. "Whose?" A pause. "Yours, primarily. What else?" And Hera had looked at him with that expression she sometimes had, the one that was about something far away and slightly heavy, and said, "We'll talk about it when you're ready." He'd known, even at 6, that she meant when she was ready. But he hadn't pushed it. With Hera, you learned to pick your moments. Zeus was a different kind of parent, louder, more obviously affectionate, prone to showing up wherever Harry was practicing and enthusiastically critiquing everything, which Harry took in stride because it meant Zeus paid attention to everything, which Harry secretly considered more valuable than empty praise. "Your control is better than mine was at your age," Zeus told him, when Harry was 9 and had learned to hold a sustained electrical field without grounding it. "How much better?" Harry asked immediately. Zeus laughed, a sound like thunder deciding to be happy. "Significantly. Don't tell Apollo I said so." Harry had grown up knowing who he was. He was Hadrian, which was what Hera called him when she was being formal, which she was approximately 80% of the time. He was Harry, which was what Zeus called him always. He was the Prince of Olympus, in the unofficial sense, which was its own complicated thing because Olympus politics were baroque and layered and everyone had an opinion, but the official sense was that he was Zeus and Hera's son, and that made the politics mostly other people's problem. He was also, he'd known since he was 5, not born of them. They'd told him early and told him plainly, without hedging or softening it into something it wasn't. "We found you," Hera had said, sitting with him in the garden, him on her lap at 5 years old, which was young for this conversation, but Harry had been asking persistent questions about where babies came from and Hera was not in the habit of deflecting. "On a doorstep, in the rain, on a night when something terrible had happened. Your first mother and father died protecting you. Their names were Lily and James Potter. They were extraordinary people. Why were we on a doorstep?" Harry had asked. "Because someone made a choice we disagreed with." "So you made a different choice?" "Yes." "Good," Harry had said, with the confident finality of a 5-year-old who has assessed the situation and approved of the outcome, and then had asked if there were biscuits. But it lived in him, the story. Not as a wound, he'd been too loved, too well held, for it to become a wound, but as a fact, a permanent piece of the geography of who he was. He had a mother who died for him. He had a father who died beside her. He had a scar that was a mark of survival. Somewhere in the world below Olympus, there was a place called Hogwarts and a community of people who used magic with wands instead of with their hands and their breath and the electric authority of their divine nature, and he belonged to that world too, in some complicated ancestral sense. He thought about it sometimes. He didn't obsess over it. The letter arrived when he was 11. It came on a Thursday morning in July, which was, Zeus later pointed out, statistically improbable, but they'd always known the day would come. Harry was in the training ground that occupied the eastern face of the mountain, working through a kata he'd developed himself over 6 months, a structured sequence that moved between physical discipline and controlled atmospheric discharge. He'd grown into his height early, lean and balanced, with the natural physical economy of someone who'd been trained since childhood by people who took physical capacity seriously. His hair was still chaotic and his eyes were still brilliant and the lightning scar on his forehead was as clear as the day he'd gotten it. He was midway through the kata when the owl arrived. A tawny owl, very ordinary looking, which landed on the training ground wall and regarded him with the particular dignified patience of the British postal system. Harry looked at it. The owl looked at him. Harry held out his arm. The letter was addressed in green ink on yellowed parchment. Mr. H. Potter, the Olympian Palace, Mount Olympus. Harry turned it over. The seal on the back was a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, a snake. He ran his thumb over it, feeling the old magic in the wax, feeling the pull of it, something that recognized him specifically and had been waiting to. He broke the seal and read the letter, standing in the morning sun on the side of a mountain above the clouds, while the training ground still hummed with residual electrical charge from the kata he'd been running. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted as a student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his training clothes and went to find his parents. Zeus was in the main hall, which meant he was ostensibly handling whatever divine administrative matters needed handling, but actually he was arm wrestling with one of the Cyclopes about something, and Hera was in her study, which she always was when she wanted to appear busy enough that Zeus couldn't drag her into Cyclops arguments. Harry knocked and pushed the door open. Hera looked up from whatever she was actually doing, which appeared to be corresponding with 3 different people simultaneously and keeping track of all of it in her head. She took one look at Harry's face and put down her pen. It came, she said. It came. He held out the letter. She read it without taking it from his hand, leaning forward slightly, reading quickly. Her face was its usual composed self, but Harry had lived with her for 10 years and he could read the small signals, the slight tension at the corner of her mouth that meant she was feeling something she hadn't decided how to express yet. Hogwarts, she said. Hogwarts, he confirmed. He sat down across from her. You knew it would come. Of course. You knew it would come because you know who I am. What I am. The whole story. He said it without accusation, just the straightforward clarity of someone who's been patient a long time and is now, reasonably, asking for the full picture. I think it's time you told me. Hera was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, went to the door, and said, without raising her voice, Zeus. A pause. Now, please. Zeus appeared in under a minute, which was fast even for him, which meant he'd been listening. He came in and sat down on the arm of Hera's chair rather than the other available chair, which was a thing he did when he was taking something seriously and wanted to be close to her. Harry noticed this without commenting on it. All right, Zeus said. The whole story. The whole story, Harry said. So they told him. The night in Godric's Hollow. Voldemort, the name landed in the room with a weight Harry could feel, the residue of something genuinely terrible, and he sat with it carefully. The curse. The rebound. The sacrificial magic that had been embedded in him by his mother's death, deep as bone, old as anything. The letter from Dumbledore. The cupboard under the stairs. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting, which both his parents noticed, because Harry was capable of being very patient when the occasion genuinely called for it. The prophecy, he said when they finished. We chose not to tell you about it, Hera said. Until you were old enough, until I was old enough to decide what to do with it, Harry said. He looked between them. Tell me now. Zeus told him. Neither the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches as his equal, marked as his equal, actually, but close enough, born as the 7th month dies. That the Dark Lord would mark him, and one must destroy the other, and it went further and got more complicated, but the core of it sat in the room like a stone. Harry was quiet for a long time after. Not worried. Not frightened. He was doing what he always did with important information, fitting it into the existing structure of everything he already knew, finding where it connected, assessing it. He'll come back, he said finally. Voldemort. He survived the rebound. Yes, Zeus said. We believe so. And there's a soul fragment in the scar. Harry touched it briefly with 2 fingers. I can feel it sometimes. It's quiet but it's there. Dead, I think. The sacrificial magic killed it but the attachment point is still present. Zeus and Hera looked at each other. You can feel it? Hera said carefully. I've felt it since I was 8. I assumed you knew. He shrugged. I can remove it if you help me anchor the extraction. You, Zeus stopped. Started again. Harry. You have known for 3 years that you had a foreign soul fragment attached to you and I didn't want to bring it up until it was relevant, Harry said. It's not hurting me. It's been dead for a decade. I was waiting until it mattered. He looked at his father. It matters now. If I'm going to Hogwarts, I should go clean. You're going. Hera said. Something in her voice that she was managing very carefully. I have to, don't I? He looked at her steadily. Not because of the prophecy. Because they're my people. Because Lily and James Potter died in a war that isn't over yet. Because whoever Voldemort comes back as, he's still out there, and he'll still hurt people. A pause. I'm not going because someone told me I'm supposed to. I'm going because I want to. There's a difference. Another moment of silence. Zeus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite something else, something that existed at the boundary between pride and grief and wonder, which is a sound unique to parents watching their children become who they were always going to be. Hera said, "You'll need robes." Harry blinked. That's your response. You'll also need your wand, which we've had since you were 2 and which you should formally claim before you arrive, rather than walking into Ollivander's and watching him have a small crisis. You'll need your school things. You'll need to understand the social landscape before you walk into it. She met his eyes. And you'll need to understand that the people there, many of them, have very specific ideas about who you are and what you should be. They built a mythology around a boy who doesn't exist. You exist. I know, Harry said. They'll stare. Good, he said. Let them. And that particular quality of ease in those 2 words, the absolute unconcerned confidence of a boy who had grown up loved and powerful and real, was the first moment Hera fully, completely relaxed about sending him. She'd been right to take him. She'd always known she was right to take him. But there was knowing and then there was knowing, and watching her son look back at her with those green eyes lit from within, completely unafraid, completely himself, and say good, let them, that was the second kind. I'll have the robes ready by Tuesday, she said. We'll deal with the soul fragment this weekend. And I want daily letters while you're there. I'll write when something interesting happens. You will write daily, Hera said, in the tone she used when something was not actually up for discussion. Daily, Harry agreed, smiling. Zeus clapped him on the shoulder, hard enough that a lesser person would have staggered. Harry didn't stagger. He stood in it, grinning up at his father, who was looking at him with an expression he rarely wore in public, open and whole and entirely unguarded. Voldemort, Zeus said, with the particular contempt of someone who has stared down titans and is doing him the honor of a response, has no idea what's coming. Harry's grin stayed. Quiet and certain and very, very warm. No, he said. He doesn't. Outside, over the mountain, the sky turned a particular shade of electric blue, the color it turned when Zeus was in an exceptionally good mood, and a crack of thunder rolled out across the cloud line, clean and enormous and entirely unnecessary. Harry looked up at it, and the scar on his forehead, for the first time in 10 years, felt completely cold. Just old tissue. An old mark. A reminder of the night he'd survived. He was done letting it be anything else. 3 weeks later, on the 1st of September, Harry James Potter, Hadrian, Prince of Olympus, God of Sky and Sovereign Power, walked through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 with his trunk and his owl and the absolute composure of someone who had decided, somewhere in the 3 weeks of preparation and conversation and one very thorough session of soul fragment removal that had turned the Eastern training ground into a briefly spectacular light show, that this was going to be interesting. The platform was chaos. Beautiful, human, entirely mortal chaos, steam and noise and shouting parents and children with owls and cats and toads, all of it moving and overlapping and wonderfully, specifically alive. Harry stood at the edge of it and breathed it in. Somewhere in this noise there was a school that had been waiting for him for a decade. Somewhere in the world below was a half-alive dark wizard who didn't know yet that the boy he tried to kill had grown up into something that didn't have a category in any of his planning. Somewhere there were Lily and James Potter, in whatever form existence took after, and they had died so he could live, and he was going to make sure it meant something. He picked up his trunk and walked into the steam. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Was Never Broken. The Hogwarts Express was magnificent in the way that only old things with genuine history are magnificent, not polished or performed, but earned. Scarlet paint worn smooth at the edges. Brass fittings that caught the platform light like they were remembering every journey they'd ever made. The steam that rolled off it carried heat and coal and something else, something that wasn't entirely explicable in physical terms, the residue of 11 decades of magic moving through its carriages. Harry stood beside it for a moment, one hand on the warm metal of the side panel, and felt the magic in the train the way he felt weather, not with his skin, but with the deeper sense, the one that had no name yet in any language but that he'd been using since childhood. Old locomotive magic. Transportation enchantments laid down in layers like geological strata. And beneath all of it, very faint, the residual signatures of thousands of children who'd ridden this train to Hogwarts for the first time, their excitement so consistent and acute across the decades that it had essentially become part of the structure. He smiled at that. Then he picked up his trunk and got on the train. He found a compartment midway down the second carriage, slid his trunk into the overhead rack with one hand without breaking stride, and sat down by the window. Hedwig, his owl, who had strong opinions about everything and was currently expressing a dignified outrage at the platform noise, shuffled on her perch inside the cage and clicked her beak. Harry unlatched the cage door and she immediately stepped onto his arm, which was what she always did when she wanted to be somewhere other than the cage but wasn't ready to commit to being somewhere specific yet. Platform's loud, Harry told her. Train'll be quieter. She gave him a look that suggested she'd believe it when she experienced it. The platform outside the window was still full of families, parents holding on to children for slightly too long, children pretending not to notice, younger siblings looking resentful at being left behind. Harry watched them with the particular quality of attention he'd had since childhood, the kind that took in everything without judgment, storing it all for later because the world was genuinely interesting and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. A woman with fiery red hair and an expression of comprehensive maternal authority was attempting to shepherd 4 boys of varying sizes toward the train simultaneously. The boys were 3, Harry revised, for distinct personalities in motion, one already boarding without fanfare, already thinking ahead, one making the separation theatrical for his mother's benefit and enjoying it, one who appeared to be attempting to smuggle something under his robes and hoping no one would notice, and one, the youngest of the boys and apparently the last aboard, who had red hair slightly longer than the others, a smudge of something on his nose, and a look of pure barely contained excitement that Harry recognized immediately as the look of someone for whom the world is always slightly more vivid than other people seem to find it. The youngest boy looked up at the train window and found Harry looking back at him through the glass. His eyes went wide. He lifted one hand in an uncertain wave. Harry raised 2 fingers in return. The boy grinned. The train shuddered and began to move. 10 minutes into the journey the compartment door opened and the red-haired boy appeared, slightly out of breath, holding his trunk at an awkward angle that suggested he'd run the last corridor. Is this compartment free? Everything else is full, or it's full of Slytherins, which is worse, according to my brothers, and, sorry. He stopped. Reorganized. Stuck out his hand. Ron Weasley. Harry looked at the hand, then at the face. 11 years old. Honest expression. Genuine, uncomplicated friendliness with a thin edge of anxiety underneath, the kind that comes from being the youngest of many in a family where precedent sets expectations. Harry Potter, Harry said, and shook his hand. Ron Weasley's eyes dropped to Harry's forehead immediately, the instinct clearly involuntary, and then shot back up to his face just as fast, the correction just a fraction too late to be casual. He went slightly pink. Sorry, Ron said. Everyone talks about, my mum said, sorry. Sit down, Harry said. Not harshly. Just cutting through the loop efficiently. Ron sat. Pushed his trunk under the seat. Looked at Hedwig. Is that a snowy owl? Yes. She's brilliant. Ron said this with such unself-conscious directness that Harry immediately decided he liked him. I've got a rat. He's asleep somewhere. Scabbers. A pause. He's not brilliant. He's sort of rubbish, actually, but he's mine. Harry nodded. How many siblings? 6. 5 brothers, 1 sister. I'm the youngest boy. He said this with the practiced resignation of someone who has summarized this fact many times. My brothers all did things at Hogwarts. Bill was head boy. Charlie was Quidditch captain. Percy'll be a prefect by next year, everyone knows it. Fred and George they're Fred and George, they're a whole thing. And my sister Ginny's 2 years younger, she's desperate to come. He stopped himself. Sorry, I talk a lot when I'm nervous. You don't need to be nervous, Harry said. It's not really about you, Ron said honestly. Not completely. It's more about everything. Starting. Sorting. My whole family's been Gryffindor, and I want to be, obviously, but what if I'm not? What if I'm the first one who isn't? Harry looked at him. You'll be Gryffindor. How do you know? Because you're sitting here talking to someone you've never met instead of keeping to yourself because it was more comfortable, and you're being honest about what you're scared of rather than pretending you're not scared. That's not a Hufflepuff trait, that's not a Ravenclaw trait, that's not a Slytherin trait. He paused. That's courage, Ron. It just looks different from the dramatic version. Ron stared at him for a moment. My mum would love you, he said. Harry laughed. It was a real laugh, startled out of him, and he felt the warmth of it move through the compartment. Ron grinned, relieved in the way people are relieved when they find out someone intimidating is actually a person. The compartment door opened again. The girl who stepped in had her bushy brown hair pulled back with a ribbon that wasn't quite managing the task, a copy of Hogwarts, a history under one arm, and an expression of organized, purposeful energy that Harry recognized as a person who had prepared thoroughly for a situation and was now conducting their preparation in real time. I'm sorry to intrude, she said, not sounding sorry, sounding efficient. I'm looking for Neville Longbottom, his toad escaped and I've been helping him look, but I haven't found it yet and I thought I'd check each compartment. Have you seen a toad? No toad, Harry said. Okay. She started to turn, then stopped. She'd done what Ron did, looked at the forehead, looked back. But where Ron had gone pink and apologetic, this girl looked at Harry with an expression of frank, calibrated assessment. Not awe. Curiosity. The kind a person has when they've read something and then encountered the actual subject and are running a quick comparison. You're Harry Potter, she said. Yes. I read about you in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. She paused. The accounts are inconsistent on several points. I suspect significant embellishment in at least 2 of them. Harry tilted his head slightly. Which points? She blinked. She had not expected that response. She stepped fully into the compartment. Well, the nature of the magical rebound, for one thing. Several accounts describe it as an unpredictable accident, but if you look at the structure of sacrificial magic, which magics of the ancient world covers in some detail, it's in the restricted section but my parents signed a waiver, it's clearly not accidental. The parameters for the rebound were set the moment the sacrifice was made. It was, in a sense, inevitable. She stopped. Sorry. I'm Hermione Granger. My parents are dentists. Harry Potter, Harry said, though she already knew that. My parents were gods. Ron made a small strangled sound. Hermione stared. Sorry. Sit down, Harry said. Both of you. This is going to be a long trip. She sat. She looked at him with an expression that had shifted from assessment to something more alert, the look of someone who has just been handed an information problem they hadn't anticipated, and is trying to decide whether to be skeptical or fascinated, and is leaning fairly heavily toward fascinated. Zeus and Hera, Harry said. They found me when I was a year old and raised me. I grew up on Olympus. I'm the son of the king and queen of the Greek gods. I have lightning-based divine power, I can manipulate weather, and I have a general authority over sky and sovereign domains that I'm still mapping the full edges of. He said it the same way he would have said I'm left-handed or I don't like parsnips, matter of fact, straightforward, no performance attached. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The Greek pantheon, she said. The actual Olympian gods. Yes. They exist. Fairly comprehensively. And you, she stopped herself, visibly reorganizing. Okay. Okay, there's actually a significant body of classical magical theory that places the Olympian divine framework as contemporaneous with foundational wizarding magic, and if you accept the continuity hypothesis then it would make complete sense for the powers to overlap. Are you a wizard? Do you have wizard magic as well as divine power? Yes. Both. Different mechanisms, different origins, but they coexist without interference. Hermione looked like she might need a moment. She took it. Then, that's extraordinary. That's one word for it, Harry said. What's another word? Ron asked. Tuesday, Harry said. On Olympus it's just Tuesday. Ron laughed, a real proper laugh, and Hermione's composure cracked open into a genuine smile, brief but entirely real, and the compartment settled into something warm and easy and oddly complete, the three of them, on a moving train through the English countryside, with a toad still loose somewhere in carriage 3 and a school getting closer by the mile. The witch with the trolley came. Harry bought half the trolley on instinct because the food looked interesting and he was curious about all of it, and ended up sharing it with Ron, who had sandwiches that were fine but clearly considered the chocolate frogs a significant upgrade. They ate and talked and Harry let Ron explain the wizarding world to him, not because he didn't know it, Hera had been thorough, but because he was interested in Ron's version of it, the internal logic of a world lived in rather than studied, and because Ron lit up when he talked about Quidditch in a way that made the topic genuinely more interesting than it had been in any written account. Hermione, for her part, was reading Hogwarts, a history and periodically inserting facts into the conversation with the timing of someone who couldn't quite help it but was becoming slightly less apologetic about it as the journey continued. The sorting's done by hat, she said, at a pause in the Quidditch discussion. An enchanted hat that reads your character. It was created by the 4 founders, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, so that the selection process would continue after their deaths. I know, Harry said. You know about the sorting hat? My mother briefed me comprehensively on Hogwarts. Oh. A pause. Which house do you think you'll be in? Harry thought about it honestly. The hat decides, he said. I'll be wherever it puts me. But if you had to guess, I don't guess about things I can wait to know for certain, Harry said. Ron and Hermione both looked at him. That's very, Ron said, and stopped. Restrained? Hermione offered. I was going to say unsatisfying, Ron said. The afternoon passed. The countryside outside turned to hills, then moors, then the wild dark landscape of northern Scotland as evening came on, and the clouds built up outside the windows, low and interesting, the kind Harry associated with certain kinds of atmospheric mood. He watched them with half his attention, just as reflex. The door slid open again. 3 boys this time, in expensive robes, 1 center, 2 flanking, arranged with the unconscious geometry of hierarchy. The center boy had white blonde hair, pale gray eyes, and the particular self-assurance of someone who had grown up knowing exactly what the hierarchy was and where they sat in it. He scanned the compartment. His eyes landed on Harry. "Harry Potter," he said. He said it with the same weight people put under certain names, not quite reverence, more like acknowledgement of a known category. He stepped in without waiting to be invited, which Harry noted without expression. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He said that with the same weighted expectation. Waiting for the name to land. Harry looked at him. "Hello." A fractional pause. Draco recalibrated, smooth about it but not entirely smooth. "I saw you buy half the trolley," he said, pivoting with the nimbleness of someone who'd been raised to navigate social situations quickly. He glanced at Ron. "You should be careful who you make friends with. Some families are better to know than others." Ron went slightly red. Harry felt the air in the compartment shift, the specific kind of shift that happens when someone moves to place themselves above someone else, and everyone present becomes aware of the structure being attempted. Harry looked at Draco Malfoy with the precise, unhurried attention he gave to interesting problems. Not hostile. Not impressed. Just, assessing. "You know," Harry said, "the interesting thing about the people I choose to be around is that I get to choose them. That's how it works." Draco looked at him. Something moved in those gray eyes, recalibration again, more significant this time. He was smart enough to recognize that the response wasn't what he'd expected and smart enough to understand that meant something. "My father says, your father," Harry said, not unkindly but with complete clarity, "isn't here." Silence. Crabbe and Goyle, who had about 3 functioning social gears between them, looked at each other with the uncertainty of people whose cue card had been taken away. Draco looked at Harry for a moment longer, reading him. Harry could feel it, trying to place him in a framework that wasn't cooperating, and then something shifted. Not backing down, exactly. More like a tactical decision to gather more information before committing to a position. "See you at school," Draco said, and left. Ron let out a breath. "Malfoy," he said. "I've heard of him. His dad's I know," Harry said. "It's fine. He was being horrible to you. He was trying to establish a hierarchy," Harry said. "It's a different thing. He's not sure what I am yet, so he was testing the structure." He picked up a chocolate frog card. "He'll figure it out eventually." Hermione was looking at him with that focused curiosity again. "You're very calm about things like that." "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because most people get defensive when someone's rude to them." "I'm not most people," Harry said simply, and flipped the frog card over to read it. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it, and went back to her book. But she was smiling slightly at the page. The train pulled into Hogsmeade Station in full dark, and they spilled out onto a platform lit by lanterns into cool night air that tasted of pine and lake water and something older. Harry stepped off the train and stopped for a moment, standing on Scottish ground, and felt the deep, particular magic of the place, not the train's layered enchantments, something much larger and more settled. Hogwarts, from here, was a presence more than a sight. He could feel it above the tree line before he could see it. "Furs years." A voice like a landslide cleared itself into language. "Furs years, this way." The man attached to the voice was extraordinary. Harry had been raised by gods and was not easily impressed by scale, but there was something specifically wonderful about Rubeus Hagrid, half-giant, keeper of grounds and keys, moving through the crowd of 11-year-olds like a friendly cliff, lantern held high, expression of enormous warmth, that had nothing to do with size. He was the most completely himself person Harry had encountered yet in this world, and Harry found that genuinely admirable. Hagrid's eyes, when they found Harry in the crowd, went very wide. His whole face did something complicated and then settled into a grin so enormous it needed the full infrastructure of his beard to support it. "Harry Potter," he said, in a voice that was supposed to be quiet but was biologically incapable of being quiet. "Look at ya. Last time I saw ya, you were 1 year old, in a basket," Harry said, looking up at him. "You were there that night?" Hagrid's grin faltered. Well, it's all right," Harry said. I know what happened. He met Hagrid's eyes. I'm glad it all went the way it did. Hagrid looked at him for a long moment with an expression of pure, baffled, deeply felt emotion, the kind that doesn't have a single word but sits somewhere between grief and joy and relief. Your mum and dad, he said, very quietly, just to Harry. They'd be so, I know, Harry said. Come on, you've got a lot of us to move. The boats on the lake were each big enough for 4 first years, which was the kind of detail that felt designed for maximum appreciation. Harry sat across from Ron and Hermione, and when the castle appeared around the bend in the lake, lit from below, towers rising against the dark sky, reflected in black water, he heard the collective intake of breath from 20-odd children simultaneously and felt something quiet and significant move through him. Home was Olympus. Would always be Olympus. But this place, this enormous, magic-saturated, history-soaked place, had something in it that recognized him in a specific way, and he recognized it back. Wicked, Ron breathed. Beautiful, Hermione said, practically. Harry said nothing. He watched the castle come closer and thought about Lily and James Potter walking this same route, sitting in a boat on this same lake, watching this same castle rise up to meet them for the first time. He didn't know what their faces had looked like. He didn't know if they'd said anything. But he thought they probably had sat just like this, quietly, fully awake to the moment. He thought, I'm here. Somewhere, however that worked, they probably knew it. That was enough. The Great Hall was everything Hera's briefings and Hermione's Hogwarts, a history had prepared him for, and was also completely different from both, because no briefing conveyed the feeling of the enchanted ceiling, the night sky rendered in perfect, living detail above 4 long tables filled with hundreds of students. Harry looked up at it immediately, the way anyone with an affinity for sky looks at sky when they encounter it, and checked it for accuracy. It was very good. Slight compression in the stratosphere layers, but impressively detailed. The first years stood in a ragged clump at the top of the hall, facing a 4-legged stool with a battered old hat on it. Hundreds of faces looking back at them. Harry scanned the hall with the same quality of attention he'd given the platform, the train, the lake, all of it, steadily, comprehensively, without feeling examined in return because he wasn't thinking about himself, he was thinking about the room. The Sorting Hat sang. Harry listened to the whole song with genuine interest, which put him in a small minority of first years. Then McGonagall began calling names. Granger, Hermione. Hermione went to the hat, sat down, sat very straight, the hat fell over her eyes, paused, and called, Gryffindor, in under a minute. She came back to the growing Gryffindor table with a carefully managed expression of relief that she was doing almost well enough to disguise. Harry watched several more sortings. The hat on Neville Longbottom, a round-faced boy who looked permanently about to apologize for something, deliberated for almost a full minute before placing him in Gryffindor 2, which seemed to both surprise and enormously relieve him. Draco Malfoy sat down, and the hat barely touched his hair before calling Slytherin. He'd known, Harry noted. That had been a homecoming, not a destination. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not gradual quiet, the way it had gone quiet for the others as the whispered conversations paused. Immediate quiet, like a switch. Every head in the hall turned. 400-odd students, plus staff at the head table, all of them looking at the small figure of a first year walking out from the cluster toward the stool. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, and looked out at the hall while the hat was placed on his head, because there was nothing to be gained from not looking, and he was curious about the faces. What he saw was awe, mostly. Recognition of a name they'd grown up with. A few faces more complicated than awe, a pale, twitching professor at the head table who was looking at him with the wide-eyed intensity of a starving man near food, Professor Dumbledore at the center of the head table, hands folded, expression of warm benevolence that Harry recognized with immediate clarity as a very good face worn over something much more calculated. And the hat. The hat spoke in his ear. My, it said. My. It sounded genuinely surprised, which Harry suspected was not common. I've put 1100 years of children in houses and I've never sat on a head like this. A pause that felt like rapid reading. Divine power of the Olympian class. Dual magical matrices. A soul that's been washed clean of a foreign attachment very recently, I can see the marks of the extraction. And underneath it all, another pause, a human heart. A genuine one. Well loved and loving in return. You could go anywhere, the hat said. Genuinely. You have the courage for Gryffindor, the wisdom for Ravenclaw, the loyalty chapter 3, the weight of a crown. The hat said he could go anywhere. Harry sat under it for what was, by any measure, the longest sorting the Great Hall had experienced since 1842, when a girl from Aberdeen had argued with the hat for 11 full minutes before it finally placed her in Hufflepuff out of what the school records described, diplomatically, as mutual exhaustion. Harry wasn't arguing. He was listening. Gryffindor, the hat said, working through its reasoning with the thoroughness of something that had been making this particular decision for over 1,000 years and took it seriously. You have the courage without question. But courage is your baseline, not your defining trait. You were brave before you knew there was anything to be brave about. Ravenclaw would suit your mind, you observe everything, you synthesize, you think before you act. But knowledge for its own sake doesn't drive you. You want to understand things so you can use the understanding. That's not quite Ravenclaw. A pause. Slytherin would be interesting. The ambition is there, buried, and the resourcefulness. But your ambition isn't about elevation. You don't want to be above people. You want to get things done, Harry thought. Yes. Precisely. Which leaves, Gryffindor, the hat announced, and the table on the left erupted. Harry pulled the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who took it with the expression of someone who had anticipated this moment for approximately 11 years and was having complicated feelings about it being smaller than expected. She collected herself with professional speed. Well done, Mr. Potter. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down across from Hermione and next to the space being saved for Ron, who was currently mouthing something at him from the cluster of remaining first years. Harry raised an eyebrow. Ron made a gesture that appeared to mean obviously and pointed at the Gryffindor table. Ron was sorted 3 names later. The hat touched his head and said, Gryffindor. Before Ron had fully sat down. He came to the table at speed, dropped into the seat next to Harry, and said, I told you, to no one in particular and everyone in general. You told me, Harry agreed. I wasn't worried. You were extremely worried. I was briefly concerned, Ron said, with tremendous dignity, and then reached across Harry for the nearest chocolate frog card on the grounds that the stress had depleted him. The feast appeared. Harry ate steadily and watched the hall and listened to everything simultaneously, which was a skill Olympus had given him whether he trained for it deliberately or not. The hall was its own ecosystem, older students at ease in the familiar space, the new first years mapping their positions at new tables with nervous energy, the staff table arranged in a specific social geography that told you things about relationships if you paid attention. Dumbledore at the center, presiding. McGonagall to his right, efficient and watchful. Snape 2 seats down, black-robed, pale, looking along the Gryffindor table with an expression that landed on Harry for a fraction of a second and became something Harry couldn't immediately categorize, not the ambition of Quirrell, not simple hostility. Something older. A wound that had been walking around for 20 years pretending it was just a personality. Quirrell, though. Harry ate a piece of roast potato and considered Quirrell. He'd felt at the moment he walked into the hall. The same way you feel a cold draft through an otherwise warm room, present, specific, wrong. Quirrell was wearing a purple turban and sitting at the end of the staff table, and the thing sitting underneath his surface was patient and very old and smelled, in the metaphysical sense, like the ghost of a killing curse. Like the dead end of the fragment that Harry had removed 3 weeks ago, except this one wasn't dead. This one was waiting. Harry chewed his potato and decided not to do anything about it yet. You didn't move before you understood what you were moving against. Who's the one in the turban? He asked Ron. Quirrell. Defense against the dark arts. Ron lowered his voice with the relish of someone sharing established gossip. He met a vampire in Romania, supposedly, had a terrible experience, and now he's a complete mess. Shaking all the time. Barely gets through a sentence without his stammer. He shook his head. They go through a new one every year, defense teachers. It's cursed, that position. Harry said. What? Ron had caught his tone. Nothing. Eat your food. Hermione, who had been following her own fork in the standard book of spells, grade 1 simultaneously with the focused energy of someone who considered the feast an opportunity rather than an obstacle, looked across at Harry. You went quiet. I was thinking. About what? Harry looked at her steadily. Things I'll tell you when I know more. She considered this. Fair enough, she said, and went back to her book, which was, Harry noted, the response of someone who understood the value of actual information over performed transparency. He appreciated that. He filed Quirrell. He went back to the feast. The first week at Hogwarts moved the way first weeks always do, too fast in the aggregate, strange in the details, full of the specific disorientation of learning a new geography and a new social landscape simultaneously. Harry navigated both with the ease of someone for whom new environments were simply information problems. The geography came quickly. Hogwarts was enormous and intentionally complex, staircases that moved, corridors that existed on Tuesdays and not on Wednesdays, portraits that gossiped and occasionally gave directions, sometimes accurate ones. Harry mapped it room by room, not with systematic thoroughness but the way he learned everything, by paying attention to what was interesting, and the interesting things being comprehensive enough that the rest filled in naturally. The social landscape was more complicated. Not because he couldn't read it. He could read it perfectly well. The problem was that he was the subject of it in a way that created a specific kind of distortion, the way a stone thrown into still water makes ripples that interfere with seeing the actual bottom clearly. Harry Potter. The boy who lived. The name had a mythology attached to it, constructed over a decade from incomplete information and the human need for heroes, and the mythology was of a particular type, the chosen suffering child, marked by fate, survivor of something terrible, defined by his damage. The wizarding world had built a story about a boy shaped by loss and destined for sacrifice, and they had needed that story, and now here was the actual person, and the actual person didn't fit the shape they'd built. He was not haunted. He was not fragile. He was not quietly desperate for belonging. He walked into rooms like he was already at home in them, which was disorienting to people who had expected something else, and he had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to things that are genuinely powerful and genuinely know it, not performed confidence, not aggression, just the ease of something that doesn't need to prove anything because proof is a concept for people who have doubt. The second years watched him with fascination. The older students assessed him with various cocktails of curiosity and something that wanted to be skepticism but kept running into evidence. The first years in Gryffindor sorted themselves around him within 3 days. Ron had claimed the position of friend with the straightforward ease of someone who decided in the first 10 minutes of the train journey and wasn't reconsidering. Hermione had arrived at the same position through a different route, more analytical but equally definite. Neville Longbottom had latched on to the general group with the quiet determination of someone who had learned to stay close to things that felt safe, and the rest of the dormitory, Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, had settled into a comfortable companionable orbit. Then there were the people who wanted something else. Potter, said a fifth-year Gryffindor on the third day, intercepting Harry near the common room stairs with the confidence of seniority and the specific energy of someone who had practiced this in their head. We need to talk about the Quidditch team. Harry looked at him. I'm a first year. First years don't play for the house team. That's normally true, the fifth year said, with the emphasis of someone about to offer a special arrangement. But Wood's been looking for a seeker for 2 years, and you've got, he gestured at Harry in a comprehensive way. I mean, obviously. Anyone can see you've got the physical, tell Wood to catch me flying sometime, Harry said pleasantly, and walked past him up the stairs. The fifth year stood in the middle of the corridor holding his prepared speech and nowhere to put it. The classes were something else entirely. Charms was elegant and precise, Flitwick a meticulous teacher who understood what he was teaching at a deep enough level to make the mechanics genuinely interesting. Harry liked it immediately. Transfiguration was McGonagall, which meant it was rigorous and demanding and moved fast, and Harry liked that too. She caught him watching the demonstration of the match-to-needle transfiguration with an expression she evidently found hard to read, because after class she said, with the careful neutrality of a professor ensuring they weren't making assumptions, "You've done some transfiguration before, Mr. Potter." "Some," Harry said. "How much is some?" "Some is accurate," Harry said. "I've worked with elemental transfiguration but not object work. It's a different discipline." McGonagall looked at him for a moment. "Elemental," she said. "Sky-based, primarily. Atmospheric change, charge conversion, that sort of thing." She was quiet for a moment with the expression of someone reconfiguring. "I see," she said finally. "You should still complete the standard exercises. The foundations matter even when you've built past them." "Agreed," Harry said. "I'll do them properly." She nodded, short and approving, and that was that, the implicit agreement that he would neither slack nor be babied, that the standards applied to him the same way they applied to everyone, and that this was what he wanted. It was. History of Magic was Binns, who was a ghost, who taught history with the emotional investment of someone reading a phone book. Harry spent the double period on the first day working through a translation of an ancient Greek astronomical text he'd borrowed from the Olympian library and periodically wondering whether anyone had ever successfully hexed a ghost out of a classroom. Hermione, across the table, was taking comprehensive notes and had filled 4 feet of parchment before the first hour was done. Potions was Snape. Harry had been thinking about Snape since the feast. The wound that walked around pretending it was a personality, he'd been working on what that meant, turning it over, and he'd arrived at a partial answer. The intensity of Snape's emotional weather, the specific quality of the suppression on it, suggested grief. Old grief. The kind that had been compressed for so long it had crystallized into something that looked like coldness from the outside. His mother's name had been Lily, and Snape was the age Lily would have been, and sometimes that math was simple. The potions classroom was in the dungeons, cool and dim, the smell of preserved ingredients and old magic sitting in the stone itself. Harry found a bench beside Ron and looked around the room, the preserved animal parts in jars along the walls, the low ceiling, the quality of the light, and found it genuinely atmospheric in a way that wasn't unpleasant. Snape entered, swept to the front without looking at anyone, and said, his voice carrying without effort, "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class. The subtle science and exact art of potion-making." His eyes moved along the class in a comprehensive arc and landed on Harry. "Mr. Potter. Our new celebrity." The room went very still. "Potter," Snape said. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry looked at him. He knew the answer. Hera had made sure he knew the answers to everything a first year could be asked in potions, not because she anticipated this moment, but because Hera did not believe in gaps. The draught of living death. He could give the answer now, precise and complete, and he could see from the quality of Snape's stillness that Snape expected him not to know. But Harry was thinking about Snape's face at the feast, that fraction of a second when his gaze had found Harry and done something complicated. He was thinking about the name Lily. He was thinking about the math. He said, "The draught of living death." Asphodel is in the Amaryllis family, the name itself is significant, from the Greek, associated with death and mourning. Combined with wormwood in an infusion state it creates a sleep so deep it approaches death. Highly dangerous. The potion requires 4 months to properly mature for full efficacy. Silence. Snape's expression had not moved. But something had happened behind his eyes. "Where the bezoar is found, Potter." Stomach of a goat. It's a calcified mass that forms in the digestive system and acts as a universal antidote to most common poisons. The term comes from the Arabic, bazar, meaning antidote. Another pause. And monk's hood. Wolfsbane. Aconite. Same plant, 3 names. One of the most toxic magical plants in common use, useful in controlled quantities for the wolfsbane potion. The flower looks like a monk's cowl, hence the name. The room was very quiet. Ron was looking at Harry with an expression of delighted disbelief. Hermione looked slightly put out in the way she looked when someone had demonstrated knowledge she'd have liked to demonstrate first, but was too honest to pretend she wouldn't have got it right herself. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. The anger he'd expected, the deflation he'd been trying to engineer, hadn't arrived, and he was reorganizing. Harry could see it. "Correct," Snape said, flatly, and moved on to the board. It wasn't warmth. It was barely acknowledgement. But it was honest, and Harry found that he could work with honesty in any temperature. The class continued. Harry completed the boil cure potion exercise with the quiet focus he gave to learning anything new, not showing off, not rushing, working through the logic of each step. Neville, at the bench behind him, melted his cauldron within the first 20 minutes, which Snape responded to with a precise and terrible precision that made Neville go pale. Harry, on his way to the supply cabinet, stopped at Neville's bench on the return trip and said, quietly, "Porcupine quills go in after you take the cauldron off the heat. Add them while it's boiling and the acid destabilizes." Neville looked up at him. "Right," he said. Grateful and surprised in equal measure. "Right, okay. Start the heat sequence again. You've got time." Snape saw this. Harry was aware of that. He went back to his own cauldron and said nothing about it. 3 weeks in, and the specific shape of Harry's situation at Hogwarts had become clear. He was not struggling. He had never been going to struggle academically, and the practical magic came naturally in the way that things do when you've been building the foundational muscle since early childhood. Wand work engaged the same underlying disciplines as divine power use, just with a different mechanism, and Harry found the translation mostly intuitive. He was ahead in most subjects and comfortable with the rest. He was not exactly lonely, either. He had Ron, who had settled into friendship with the ease of someone who'd needed a particular kind of friend and found one, and he had Hermione, who was becoming something that had no name yet but was recognizably important. He had Neville drifting into the orbit of their small group with the quiet gratitude of someone who'd found ground that felt stable. But there was something. A quality of separation that wasn't distance, exactly. More like a different altitude. He was in the same rooms as everyone else, in the same classes, eating at the same table, and he was also, always, slightly above the cloud line that everyone else navigated at. Not through arrogance. Just through difference, the inescapable fact of what he was, sitting underneath everything else. He noticed it most at night. The dormitory after lights out, for other boys settling into sleep with the sounds of the normally exhausted, and Harry lying in the dark, wide awake, not anxious but aware in a way that made normal sleep a more complicated proposition. He'd send weather sometimes, small and personal, a temperature drop, a quality of stillness in the air, the specific atmospheric pressure that sat over mountains at altitude, and it helped. It was like having a piece of home he could carry. He wrote to Hera every day, as promised. He wrote to Zeus most days, which was not what he'd promised but was what turned out to be necessary, because Zeus's letters were different from Hera's. Hera's were thorough and engaged and full of sharp questions about things he'd mentioned. Zeus's were shorter, less careful, and had a quality that Harry recognized as his father managing the distance by keeping things light. He wrote back in kind, detailed to Hera, easy to Zeus, and the letters that came back to him via Olympian courier, bypassing the school owl post entirely, were the thing that made the altitude bearable. Not because he needed them to function. Just because being loved well made everything else navigable. He also wrote to no one else, because there was no one else to write to, and he was honest enough with himself to know that was the thing he hadn't fully accounted for. Zeus and Hera were his. Olympus was his. But the world below, the whole complicated, human, mortal, magical world, was a place he'd chosen to step into, and the people in it were still learning what to do with him. That was fine. He was patient. The troll happened on Halloween. It was the kind of event that revealed things about people more clearly than any normal circumstance, the specific quality of a crisis, how it stripped away the constructed surface and showed what was actually underneath. Harry knew about it before Quirrell's announcement at the feast. He'd been aware of the troll's presence in the building since it entered the fourth-floor corridor 20 minutes earlier, because a mountain troll walking through a stone corridor created a very specific kind of seismic signature, and Harry had been trained since childhood to read atmospheric and physical disturbances, and a troll was both. He'd been deciding how to handle it, the options, the implications, whether to move independently or wait. He was still deciding when Quirrell burst into the hall and fainted, and the room erupted. McGonagall's voice cut through, houses to dormitories, prefects leading. Harry stood up, already knowing he wasn't going to the dormitory, scanning the hall quickly. Ron was beside him immediately. "Hermione, where's Hermione?" Harry said. Ron's face shifted. She was in the girls' bathroom. On the third floor. She was crying. She didn't come to the feast, because Parvati said something. Harry was already moving. Ron fell into step beside him without needing to be asked, which Harry noted with approval. They took the back stairs, bypassing the prefect-led house procession. Harry tracked the troll through the stone. Its progress was easy to follow, the impact signature of 12 feet of mountain troll, moving through the second-floor corridors. It was heading in the general direction of the third-floor girls' bathroom, drawn by noise or smell or simple structural collision. "You knew about the troll already," Ron said, keeping up, looking at Harry sideways. "Since the fourth floor. And you didn't say anything?" "I was deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether to handle it before the feast, which would have caused a different kind of problem, or wait until I had more information about the threat vector. A troll in an empty corridor is a nuisance. A troll with a target is urgent." He turned the corner. "Hermione's the target." "Right," Ron said, and didn't question it. They found it outside the bathroom door, which it had already partially destroyed, the door hanging off one hinge, the troll's enormous club embedded in the stone above the frame. Inside, Hermione was backed against the far wall, arms over her face, completely still with the paralysis of pure shock. Ron grabbed a faucet handle off the floor and threw it, straight into the back of the troll's head, a good throw for 11 years old, and it turned. It was large. Harry regarded it objectively. 10, 11 feet, gray-green, the kind of physical mass that didn't acknowledge anything below a certain size as worth addressing. It swung its club sideways at the space Ron occupied, and Ron dove under the sinks. Harry took a breath. "Hey," he said. The troll turned to him, small red eyes finding the new presence, and Harry looked back at it with the same calm he gave to everything. He raised one hand. The air in the bathroom changed. A pressure drop that was felt before it was understood, the specific atmospheric signature of something very large and very old extending itself into a space. Not violence, not yet. Just presence. The kind that preceded lightning. The kind that made animals go still before a storm. The troll went still. It looked at Harry with the ancient, limited intelligence of its kind, and something in that intelligence registered wrong, registered that the thing in front of it was not in a category that had a response, was not prey, was not threat in the normal sense, was something that sat outside the troll's entire experiential vocabulary. Harry brought his hand up, 2 fingers, and discharged a controlled electrical pulse, not a full bolt, not atmospheric scale, precisely calibrated, directly into the troll's central nervous system via the club in its hand, which was a good conductor. The troll went rigid. Its eyes went blank. It fell, slowly, with the majestic inevitability of a very large building being carefully demolished, and hit the bathroom floor with a concussion that cracked 3 of the tiles. Ron emerged from under the sinks. He looked at the troll. He looked at Harry. He looked at the troll again. You didn't even use your wand, Ron said. Didn't need it. You just raised your hand, electrical discharge to the nervous system. Clean and specific. It's fine, it's not dead, it'll wake up in about 20 minutes with a substantial headache. Hermione had lowered her arms. She was staring at Harry from across the bathroom with an expression that had moved through shock, through recalibration, through several other states, and arrived somewhere that was mostly focused attention. Her hair was disheveled. She had a cut on her forearm from flying tile. She was otherwise completely intact. Are you all right? Harry asked. Yes, she said. Then, you knew it was coming. I tracked it from the 4th floor. Why didn't you warn anyone? McGonagall had the evacuation in hand. The feast hall was never in the threat path. The only complication was your location, and I handled that. You handled that, Hermione said slowly. You're welcome, Harry said. A beat. Hermione looked at the troll. She looked at Harry. Something shifted in her expression, the assessment, the calibration, and then settled into something different. Warmer. More real. Thank you, she said. Both of you. She looked at Ron. You threw that. Yeah, well. Ron shrugged with the self-consciousness of someone not sure how to accept credit. It was just a faucet handle. It was a good throw, Harry said. Ron went slightly pink. Played a lot of two-hand ball with my brothers. He looked at Hermione. You were crying earlier. Before the feast. Hermione went still. Who told you that? Parvati. She said you heard her telling Lavender about what she thought of your, I can't remember, something, it doesn't matter, Hermione said crisply. It does, a bit, Harry said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. People can be careless, he said, not unkindly. They say things about people without remembering the people can hear. It's not about you specifically. They just, he paused. They don't know you yet. They've got a version of you that's easier to hold than the real thing. The real thing takes more effort. Hermione was very quiet for a moment. Is that what it's like for you too? She asked. More or less. Does it bother you? Harry thought about it honestly. Sometimes, he said. Then I write to my parents and it passes. She nodded, slowly. Something in her face that was unguarded in a way her face usually wasn't, a glimpse of the actual person under the armor of competence and preparation, someone who was not entirely unlike Harry in the fundamental way that people who've grown up feeling somewhat beside the point tend to be similar even when everything else about them is different. McGonagall arrived 30 seconds later, followed by Snape and Quirrell, all three of them taking in the scene with varying degrees of controlled alarm. The troll on the floor. Harry and Ron standing in the bathroom. Hermione with a cut on her arm that Snape was already moving toward with a healing charm. Explain, McGonagall said, looking at Harry. I tracked the troll from the 4th floor, Harry said. Hermione was in the bathroom. Ron and I came to get her out. McGonagall looked at the troll. Back at Harry. At the troll again. The creature is unconscious. Electrical discharge. It'll be fine in 20 minutes. She stopped. Started again. The troll is approximately 11 feet tall and weighs in the region of a metric ton, Mr. Potter. Yes, Harry agreed. McGonagall looked at him for a moment with an expression he was beginning to recognize as her recalibrating face, the one she wore when new information required structural adjustment to existing frameworks. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said, finally. Each. For courage, if not sense. A pause that was almost nothing. An exceptional magical application. It was not a small acknowledgement, coming from McGonagall. Harry heard the weight in it. Quirrell was looking at the troll with an expression that Harry read carefully, not surprise, exactly. The quality of someone checking a result against an expectation. He caught Harry looking at him and looked away too fast, which was its own kind of answer. Harry filed it. He was building a picture, and every piece of it mattered. Walking back to Gryffindor Tower afterward, Hermione fell into step beside him. Ron was on his other side, describing the troll incident to himself under his breath in the manner of someone assembling it into a story for later telling. Harry, Hermione said quietly. The thing you said. About people having a version of you that's easier to hold than the real thing. She was looking straight ahead. How are you so untroubled by it? The gap between what they expect and what you are. Harry considered. I know what I am, he said simply. I've always known. It's not arrogance. It's just, I was never in doubt about that. So the gap between their version and the real thing is their problem to solve, not mine. Hermione was quiet. And anyway, Harry said, you don't have a version of me. You've had the real thing since the compartment on the train. She looked at him. Something behind her eyes that was complicated and genuine in trying to decide on a word for itself. I know, she said. So do you, Harry said. For what it's worth. I haven't had a version of you either. It was not dramatic. It was not a moment with music under it. It was two 11-year-olds walking down a corridor in a castle, arriving at an understanding about each other that would, in the years to come, be the foundation of something that neither of them had vocabulary for yet. But the foundations are always laid quietly. Ron, on Harry's other side, heard all of it and said nothing, which was itself a form of understanding, because Ron at his best was someone who knew when a thing didn't need his commentary to be complete. The three of them walked back to Gryffindor Tower, and outside the high windows the Scottish night was fully dark, and the sky above it was extraordinarily clear, every star visible, sharp and complete, the kind of clarity that required someone who cared about the sky to be in a good mood. Harry looked up at it through a window on the landing. Zeus was in a good mood. He almost sent something back, a small atmospheric acknowledgement, a charge in the upper layers. Then he thought about it and decided just to feel it instead. Just to stand at the window and look up at his father's sky and feel, in the way you feel things that don't have words, that he was known and loved in the largest sense available. Then Ron said, "Come on, I need food." That was an enormous amount of adrenaline on an empty stomach, and the moment ended naturally. Harry turned from the window, grinning, and followed his friends up the stairs. Chapter 4, Fire Beneath the Mountain. December came to Hogwarts the way it always did, not gradually but all at once, the castle waking up one morning with frost on the inside of the tower windows and the grounds transformed overnight into something that looked like a painting of itself. The lake had a thin skin of ice at the edges. The forest was dark and deep and still in the specific way forests get when the animals have made their decisions about winter. Harry stood on the Quidditch pitch at 6 in the morning and breathed it in. He'd been flying for 3 weeks. Oliver Wood had found him on the second Thursday of November, having apparently spent the intervening weeks constructing an argument so comprehensive that it had a table of contents, and Harry had listened to the whole thing, including the table of contents, and then said yes because he'd been going to say yes anyway and would deserve the payoff for the preparation. The first-year rule had been suspended on McGonagall's authority. She had attended the conversation, which suggested it had been her idea and Wood had simply been the delivery mechanism, and Harry had been given a Nimbus 2000 and a seeker position and the complicated honor of being the first year on a house team in over a century. He flew because it was the closest thing to home that Hogwarts had. Not the speed, though the speed was excellent. Not the height, though he flew higher than Wood asked him to, high enough that the castle below was a detailed model and the grounds were a map and the clouds, when they were low, were around him rather than above him. It was the sky itself. The specific quality of being inside it, fully surrounded by the medium his father governed, embedded in the element that was the truest version of where he came from. He could feel Zeus in the sky here. Not literally, not communication, Zeus wasn't watching every time Harry went for a flight, but the sky on Earth was his father's domain in the most fundamental sense, and being inside it was like being held by something enormous that didn't need to be paying attention to hold you. He looped the pitch once, easy and fast, and came down in a smooth arc that ended with both feet on the frozen grass, the nimbus settling under his hand. Wood, who had been watching from the stands at 6 in the morning because Wood was devoted to Quidditch in the way certain people are devoted to things that consume them completely, made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. "The Slytherin game is in 2 weeks," he said, trotting down from the stands. "I know," Harry said. "Flint's been training his team since October." "I know that too. Their seeker is Marcus Flint's cousin. He's got a Nimbus 2000 as well, Flint made sure of it, and he's been flying since he was 4, Wood," Harry said. "We'll win." Wood looked at him. Harry looked back at him. There was a quality to Harry's certainty that consistently stopped Wood's anxiety in its tracks, not because it was dismissive but because it was so entirely grounded. It wasn't the confidence of someone who hadn't considered the alternative. It was the confidence of someone who had considered the alternative and found it insufficiently supported by evidence. "Right," Wood said. He paused. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "That thing where you say something and it just settles. Like the conversation's done." Harry considered this. "I usually mean what I say." Wood stared at him. "That's it. Most people don't, quite. Or they mean it but they're not sure they mean it. So when someone says something and actually means it fully, it sounds different." He tucked the nimbus under his arm. "Breakfast?" Wood followed him across the pitch with the expression of someone who had just received information that was technically simple and philosophically enormous. The Quidditch match against Slytherin happened on a Saturday in early December, in weather that was overcast but dry, the clouds high enough that they weren't a visibility problem, just a grey lid over the pitch that made the green grass below very green. Harry sat on his broom at center pitch height and waited for the snitch to be released, and let the crowd noise become background, and let the cold air settle into him, and was still. The snitch was gold and fast and had the particular quality of magical objects that were created to be found, not found easily, but find ably, the design intention baked into the enchantment. Harry had played enough training games to understand that the Seeker's work was 90% attention and 10% reflexes, and that the attention wasn't watching for the snitch but watching for the conditions under which it would want to be seen. The snitch had a personality, in the magical object sense. It had preferences about light and height and it moved in patterns that were random within parameters, and the parameters were learnable. He found it in 11 minutes. It wasn't a particularly dramatic catch, no dive, no near collision, no last-second heroics. He simply saw it, moved to where it was going to be 12 seconds before it got there, and held out his hand, and it flew into his palm with the resigned elegance of something that had tried its best but recognized when it had encountered a superior attention. The match was over. The Slytherin stands went very quiet. The Gryffindor stands went very loud. Wood's voice could be heard above both, saying something that wasn't fully words but communicated profound emotional relief. Harry closed his fist around the snitch and looked at it for a moment, small and gold, wings folded. Then he flew down to the pitch and put it in Wood's hands, because the win was the team's and the snitch was the punctuation mark on it, not the whole sentence. Flint's cousin, landing his own broom nearby, looked at Harry with an expression of pure, undisguised bafflement. "You didn't even look like you were looking for it," he said. "I wasn't looking for it," Harry said. "I was waiting for it." "What's the difference?" Harry thought about how to explain the difference between searching and patience to someone for whom seeking was about activity rather than attention, and decided it wasn't a conversation the pitch was right for. "Good flying," he said instead, genuinely, and walked off. December deepened. The Great Hall got its Christmas trees, 12 of them, and the first years divided neatly into those going home for the holidays and those staying. Ron was staying, most of the Weasleys were visiting a relative in Romania, and Ron had been invited but declined on the specific grounds that Charlie's letters had mentioned a dragon hatching that Ron wanted to hear about but not actually be near. Hermione was going home to her parents. Neville was going to his grandmother. Harry was staying because Hogwarts in December was worth experiencing, and because he'd made his choice to be here and intended to be fully here, and because he was following a thread. The third-floor corridor. He'd known about the dog since the end of September. The door at the end of the right-hand corridor on the third floor was locked with magic that was good but not extraordinary, competent warding, the kind that would stop students but wouldn't stop anything that genuinely meant to get past it. Behind the door, based on the combination of the seismic signature and the distinctive magical profile and the smell, which carried through stone better than most people expected if you knew how to read it, a three-headed dog of significant size. Cerberus level, possibly actually Cerberus line, though the originals were considerably larger. And underneath the dog, based on the floor vibration when it shifted its weight, a trapdoor. Harry had catalogued this in October and placed it in the file he was building on the Philosopher's Stone, which he knew about because Hera had briefed him on current events in the wizarding world as part of his Hogwarts preparation, and the stone's movement from Gringotts to Hogwarts had been a piece of information she considered relevant to his situational awareness. The file had several sections. The stone, confirmed present, location narrowing. Quirrell, the dark presence under his surface was growing. Not dramatically, it was patient, whatever it was, but growing. The turban. The cold draft of old evil in a warm room. The face at the feast checking results against expectations when the troll didn't produce the outcome it had been meant to produce. Dumbledore, present, watching. Harry had felt the headmaster's attention on him in a specific way since the sorting, not threatening, not unkind, something more like an architect looking at a building they'd designed that had come out differently than the plans. Adjusting. The connection between all three, the stone was here, Quirrell was here, and Dumbledore had built the protection because someone was going to try to steal it, and the someone was the thing living in Quirrell's turban, and the only question was when. Harry was not particularly alarmed by this. He was prepared. He was also, he acknowledged honestly, waiting to see how things developed, because there was a version of this where Dumbledore handled it and Harry's role was purely preventive, and there was a version where the old man's plans had the same hole in them that all plans had when they were designed around a version of Harry that had never existed. He suspected the second version was more likely. Christmas at Hogwarts was excellent. The castle went quiet in the way castles do when most of their people are elsewhere, not empty, exactly, more like a held breath, the space between phrases in music. Harry and Ron had the dormitory to themselves, which meant conversations that went until midnight and games of chess that Ron won comprehensively because Ron played chess the way Harry flew, with an understanding of the medium at a level beneath conscious strategy. "You're brilliant at this," Harry told him on the third evening, watching his king get cornered from three directions simultaneously. "Chess is logical," Ron said. "Everything has rules. I like rules. It's people that are confusing." He moved his queen with the confidence of a tactician who already knows what the board will look like in 5 moves. Checkmate. Harry looked at the board. "You saw that 8 moves ago." "6, Ron said. "I let you think you were closing in for 2 moves because it made the actual end cleaner." Harry looked at him with genuine appreciation. "You're going to be terrifying when you're older." Ron looked pleased and uncertain in equal measure. "It's just chess." "It's never just chess." Christmas morning, Harry received a package from Olympus wrapped in something that wasn't quite fabric, shimmering, light-absorbing, not definitively material, and inside it a note from Zeus in his large, authoritative handwriting that always looked slightly like it should be carved into stone, for the son of the sky, that no ceiling should ever hold him. The object underneath the note was a compass, small and golden, that didn't point north but pointed toward the nearest open sky, which on Olympus was everywhere, and here was a window. From Hera, a book, ancient, in Greek, on the theory of divine power management, the margins filled with her own handwriting, decades of annotations, observations, corrections of the original author's errors in places. At the front, in her precise hand, "You will surpass everything in this book. Read it anyway. I've marked the parts that will remain useful." Harry sat in the warm common room, the only first-year Gryffindor present, Ron opposite him with a stack of Weasley jumper and chocolate from his mother that came with a smaller package for Harry, a Weasley jumper of his own, green to match his eyes, with a small golden H on the front. Harry turned the jumper over in his hands. Something quiet moved through him. He put it on immediately. Ron looked up from his chocolate frogs and grinned. She does one for everyone. She says you're part of she doesn't do them for people outside the family, is the thing. Harry smoothed the front of the jumper. He was thinking about a woman he'd never met, broad and fierce and generous, deciding that the boy her son had brought home from school was family now, and acting accordingly, which was an entirely uncalculated thing to do and therefore entirely trustworthy. I'll write her, Harry said. She'll love that, Ron said. She'll send you more food immediately. January brought the second semester with the bleak efficiency of January everywhere, and Harry returned to the thread he'd been following with renewed focus. He made a deliberate visit to the third-floor corridor on the first Saturday back, when the building was in the lethargic recovery of post-holiday return and no one was paying the kind of attention that mattered. He unlocked the door with a touch. The warding recognized nothing from him to exclude, which was itself interesting and suggested Dumbledore had either not anticipated him specifically or had, and was watching to see what he'd do, and pushed it open. The three-headed dog was large. Possibly Cerberus line after all, the scale was right, the three heads moving in desynchronized attention rhythms. The room smelled of dog and old magic and the specific mineral cold of deep stone. The middle head looked at Harry. The left head looked at Harry. The right head looked at Harry. Harry looked back at all three simultaneously, which was a skill. He extended the same atmospheric authority he'd used on the troll, not force, just presence, the particular pressure of something the dog's instinct placed above it in a hierarchy older than its training. The heads dropped. All three, in sequence, settling from alert to watchful to the low, steady breathing of something that had recognized a legitimate authority. Harry crouched and looked at the trapdoor. Large, wooden, secured with a simple physical latch rather than magic, which was interesting. The security was the dog, not the door, which meant below the dog the enchantments began. He could feel them from here, a layered sequence, multiple casters, the signatures distinctive enough that he could map them roughly. Flitwick's work in there. McGonagall's. Sprout's. Quirrell's own signature, which was interesting because it meant he'd been asked to contribute to the protection of the thing he intended to steal, and had done so, which meant his contribution was designed to appear effective and be bypassable. And deeper down, something else. Warm and ancient, not protective magic but reactive magic, a final layer built by someone who understood love at a theoretical and foundational level. Harry stayed for 3 minutes. He mapped what he could without going further. He noted the sequence, the gaps, the specific shape of Quirrell's contribution and its actual bypass mechanism, which was not clever but was subtle enough to fool someone who trusted the caster. Then he stood, gave the middle head a brief scratch between the ears, and left. He told Ron and Hermione that evening in a quiet corner of the common room, because they had earned the information by virtue of being the people he trusted and because keeping them in the dark was neither kind nor strategically sensible. Ron said, immediately, so the stone is actually here. In the castle. Below the third floor, Harry said. And Quirrell is, compromised. Something's using him. Something old and very dark. Hermione had been quiet through both disclosures, thinking hard, the kind of thinking that looked from the outside like stillness but was anything but. Voldemort, she said. You think it's Voldemort. I think it's what's left of him. Not his full self. A fragment, parasitic, living off Quirrell's body and magic while his own regenerates. Ron shuddered. That's horrible. Yes, Harry said. It's also his primary vulnerability. He's dependent on Quirrell's body. He can't act at full capacity. He's been patient because patience is what the situation requires, not because he has the option to be impatient. He paused. He needs the stone to generate a body of his own. Without it, he's dependent on hosts indefinitely. So we tell Dumbledore, Hermione said. Harry looked at her. She met his eyes. She was smart enough to see it already, the shape of the problem, but she was also someone who believed in legitimate structures and the people placed in authority within them, and that belief was not stupid, it was principled, and Harry respected it even where he disagreed with the conclusion. "Dumbledore knows," Harry said. "A beat." "He knows," Hermione said. "He's known since before I arrived. He built the protections to be penetrable. Not easily, not by most people, but specifically penetrable, because Dumbledore built a trap, not a vault. He wants Voldemort to try for the stone." "Why would he?" Hermione stopped. "Work through it. To reveal himself. To force a confrontation on controlled ground." "Yes. The problem," Harry said, "is that the ground isn't as controlled as he thinks. Quirrell's protection layer is rigged. Dumbledore doesn't know that. He trusts his faculty. He let that sit. And the final protection, the stone itself, is in a mirror. Only someone who wants to find it but not use it can retrieve it. Which Dumbledore correctly identifies as the critical safeguard. Voldemort can't retrieve it himself. He needs someone else's hands." A pause. "Someone whose desire for the stone is retrieval rather than use." Ron was following all of this with the focused attention of someone working a chess problem. "Which means he needs Quirrell to want to find it but be incapable of using it. Or someone else. Someone else who wants to find it without using it," Hermione said slowly. "Then, he'd want someone who wanted to find it to give it away." "To give it to him," Harry said. "Yes." They sat with this. "He'll move soon," Harry said. "The timeline is tightening. Dumbledore's going to be called away, there are circumstances being arranged for that. And when Dumbledore's absent, Quirrell will go. So we go first," Ron said. Harry looked at him. "We go down there," Ron said, with the simple practicality of someone who has made a strategic assessment and is committing to it. "Before Quirrell does. We get to the stone. We make sure he can't get it. Or," he looked at Harry. "Can you just destroy the stone?" "I could," Harry said. "But destroying the stone doesn't destroy Voldemort. He's still in Quirrell. He'll find another way eventually, another host, and the next move happens somewhere less controlled." "So we go down," Hermione said. It was not quite resigned. It was the sound of someone who believes in doing the thing properly, and has assessed the situation, and found that the thing that needs to be done is the thing in front of them. "And we face whatever's there." "I go down," Harry said. "You help me get there." "Harry, I mean it," Harry said, not loudly, but with that quality of complete meaning that Wood had noticed on the pitch. "What's down there isn't a problem for an 11-year-old. It's barely a problem for me, and I'm not being modest. I need you both here because if something goes wrong above ground, someone needs to be able to reach Dumbledore, and I need someone with Ron's chess brain at the board problem, because there's a chess game down there that I suspect is not passable without it." He looked at Ron. "And I need someone who can manage the plant challenge, because Hermione, your herbology is better than mine." Hermione and Ron looked at each other. "He's already been down and mapped it," Hermione said. "Not all the way," Harry said. "Just to the trapdoor. I needed to understand the shape before committing." "How long have you been planning this?" Ron asked. "Since October." Ron pressed his lips together. "Right," he said. "You could have told us." "I'm telling you now. Because you need us." "Because I trust you," Harry said. "And because you deserve to know sooner, and I was being careful when I should have been trusting my own assessment of your character." He paused. "I'm sorry for that part." Ron looked slightly taken aback. Harry didn't generally apologize for things, not because he was arrogant but because he was usually not wrong about operational decisions, and Ron had adjusted his expectations accordingly. The apology landed with more weight than it would have from someone who issued them more often. "Fine," Ron said. "When?" "Dumbledore leaves Thursday," Harry said. "Quirrell will move Thursday night." "How do you know Dumbledore leaves Thursday?" Because he received a letter this morning from the ministry and his expression at breakfast was the expression of someone making a decision they don't like about timing, and he looked at the third-floor corridor once before returning to his meal. Hermione stared at him. You watched all of that from the Gryffindor table. I watch everything, Harry said simply. It's not remarkable. Thursday came with the inevitability of all scheduled things. Dumbledore was gone by evening. Harry spent the day normally, classes, meals, an hour in the library with Hermione going over the logic of what lay below, mapping the protection sequence against what they knew of each professor's contribution. Hermione had worked out the potion puzzle from first principles, which was, Harry told her sincerely, impressive work. She looked at him. You already knew the solution. Not the specific configuration. I knew the category of puzzle. You worked out the specific solution from nothing. That's genuinely different. He met her eyes. Give yourself the credit. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. After dinner, after the common room had emptied towards sleep, Harry went to the third floor. He went alone for the first section, as planned. Ron and Hermione would follow on his signal when the obstacle sequence needed their specific competencies. He went through the locked door with the same ease as before, past the dog who settled for him as it had before, and dropped through the trapdoor into the dark below. The devil's snare was immediate and comprehensive. Harry fell through its tendrils, felt the grip, and discharged enough heat and light from his hands to make the plant recoil in every direction simultaneously, creating a clear drop to the stone floor below. He landed, looked up at the retreating plant, and continued. The flying key room next, hundreds of them, the winged keys moving in complex patterns, the locked door at the far end needing the specific original key. Harry could have forced the door. He didn't, because forcing it would change the integrity of the sequence and might trigger countermeasures further down. He stood in the center of the room and let his attention settle into the key pattern, reading the movement the same way he read weather, looking for the structure beneath the apparent chaos, and found the right key in 40 seconds, motionless against the ceiling where it had retreated after heavy use, wings bent from previous catches. He flew up, no broom needed, simply extended his authority over the air and lifted himself, plucked the key with one hand, and unlocked the door. He sent the signal upward, a specific atmospheric pulse that Hermione and Ron could feel as a change in air pressure in the third-floor corridor, and they would come for the chessboard. Harry moved ahead. The chess room was vast, the pieces enormous, the board impossible to cross without playing. Harry stood at the edge and waited. 3 minutes later, Ron and Hermione came through the devil's snare passage. Hermione had produced sufficient light without difficulty, and Ron looked at the chess board with the expression of someone who has found the exact problem their specific brain was built for. Go, Ron said. Both of you. I'll open the path. Harry looked at him. I know what I'm doing, Ron said, meeting his eyes. Not defensive. Certain. I know you do, Harry said. He and Hermione went through the troll, already unconscious. Someone had dealt with it in advance, which was interesting, and Harry filed it, and arrived at the potion puzzle room. Hermione worked through it with the focused precision of someone who had prepared, identifying the correct bottle in 4 minutes. One goes forward, she said. One goes back. The others are nettle wine or poison. This one. She touched the smallest bottle, round-bottomed, the potion inside an unusual temperature. Forward. You go back, Harry said. Harry, Hermione. He looked at her. Ron needs someone on this side of the board. And what's through that fire is not something you need to be next to. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she wore when she was simultaneously arguing and knowing she wasn't going to win, which was different from the expression she wore when she was just arguing. Write to Dumbledore, Harry said. Use the school owls, fastest available. Tell him exactly what's happening. He needs to know, regardless of outcome. Regardless of, she stopped. Harry, what do you mean regardless? I mean I intend to be fine, he said. But Dumbledore needs to know about Quirrell either way. Send the letter. He picked up the forward potion bottle. Go. She went. Harry heard the black flames come back up behind her. He drank the potion, walked through the purple flames, and entered the last room. It was simply furnished. The mirror of Ariste stood at the far end, enormous, its frame carved with the legend Harry knew from Hera's briefing. And in front of the mirror, his back to Harry, Professor Quirrell. He turned. The stammer was gone. The trembling was gone. The nervous energy, the performed incompetence, all of it stripped away to reveal what was underneath, which was a man standing in the posture of someone who has been two things at once for long enough that neither face feels quite real anymore. What remained was cold and purposeful. Harry Potter, Quirrell said. His voice had a quality it hadn't had before, a flatness, an undertone, as if two sounds were being made in the same larynx. I'd heard you were impressive. Quirrell, Harry said. You've been watching me since September. Not a question. A check, the way you check a variable. I wondered when you'd arrive. I wanted to understand the full picture first, Harry said. I don't like moving before I'm ready. Quirrell smiled. A sensible quality. He took a step toward the mirror. I need you to tell me what you see. The mirror shows the person what they want most. I see myself with the stone, but I cannot retrieve it, because I want to use it. He stopped. I've thought carefully about you, Mr. Potter. What does a god's child want with a stone that grants immortality? You already have it. You want to find it. You want to secure it. Your desire is acquisition without use. Harry said nothing. Look in the mirror, Quirrell said. Tell me what you see. No. A pause. No. Quirrell said. No, Harry said. Same tone, same register. Not louder, not harder, simply the same word a second time with the same complete meaning. The room temperature dropped. Not naturally, a deliberate application of cold, Quirrell's magic or the thing animating it, filling the space with the specific chill of dark power manifesting. Harry felt it land and stood in it without changing his posture. You should be afraid, Quirrell said, and now the voice was clearly double, the undertone rising, the secondary presence surfacing like something coming up from deep water. I'm not, Harry said. I killed your parents. The room was very still. Harry let the statement sit in the air. He felt what it brought up in him, not fear, not grief, not even anger, exactly. Something quieter and more certain. The way a door feels when you close it properly. I know what you did, Harry said. And I know what it cost you. You destroyed yourself trying to kill a 1-year-old and you've spent 10 years rebuilding from almost nothing. That's not power. His voice was even. That's consequence. Enough. The voice was singular now, not Quirrell's at all, a different register entirely, something that had spent years as a whisper and was not going to be quiet any longer. Enough of this. Unwrap my face, Quirrell. Quirrell's hands went to his turban. Harry watched, and his face didn't change, and his hands were loose at his sides, and the air around him was perfectly still in the way air is still at the center of something large. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was barely a face. It was the memory of a face, sunken, red-eyed, the impression of a nose where a nose had been, and eyes that were entirely present, entirely conscious, entirely cold, looking at Harry with the focused hatred of something that had failed at this once and would not fail again. Harry Potter, it said. The room vibrated with it. I remember you. Harry looked at it steadily. I don't remember you, he said. I was 1 year old. You're just information to me. The eyes narrowed. You want the stone, Harry said. You want the body. You want the life. And you can't have it, because the stone doesn't belong to you and the mirror won't give it to you and Quirrell can't retrieve it and you've run completely out of moves. He tilted his head slightly. Do you understand that? Not as a threat. As an assessment. You're done, tonight. The body you're wearing is dying, Quirrell's been hosting you for months and there's very little of him left. You need the stone or you need to leave. And I'm not going to let you have the stone. A pause, brief and loaded, like the second before lightning discharges. Kill him, the voice said to Quirrell. Quirrell turned. His hands came up, and the magic that came off them was violent and immediate and not small, dark curses, properly powered, the kind that required no incantation and left no room for discussion. Harry moved. Not dramatically. Not with performance. The curses hit a field of charged air 3 feet in front of him and were redirected, their energy captured and grounded through the stone floor, which cracked in a neat circle around Harry's position. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put his hand on Quirrell's arm. What happened then was not intentional, not planned, not anticipated even by Harry. The sacrificial magic in him, his mother's magic, embedded in him at a cellular level, part of his foundational structure the way his bones were, met the dark presence in Quirrell like a wave meets a cliff. Not violently. Simply incompatibly. 2 things that could not occupy the same space. Quirrell's arm, where Harry's hand touched it, began to blister. Quirrell screamed. Harry held on. He understood, in the moment, that this was what the magic was for, not just protection, not just survival, but contact. The love that had been distilled into him on a night in Godric's Hollow, the most ancient and fundamental magic, encountering the most deliberately loveless thing in the wizarding world, and being itself, simply and completely. He held on. The presence screamed, a sound that wasn't sound, a pressure that went past the ears and hit somewhere deeper, and tore itself free, and the room exploded outward with the force of the departure, and Quirrell dropped, and Harry stood in the wreckage of the final chamber with his hand still extended and Quirrell motionless on the floor. The presence was gone. Not destroyed. Dispersed. Fled. Harry lowered his hand. The room settled. The mirror behind him was still and dark. The stone was still inside it, untouched, exactly where Dumbledore had put it, where it would stay. Harry stood in the quiet and breathed slowly. He thought about Lily Potter. He thought about the magic she'd given him on a night she'd known was the last one. He thought about how she'd had no way of knowing it would end up here, in a room under a Scottish castle, being used exactly as she'd intended it when she decided her love was worth more than her survival. He thought, thank you. Then he went to Quirrell, checked his pulse, weak, present, and waited for Dumbledore to arrive. He woke up in the hospital wing 2 days later. Not injured. He'd gone there deliberately, to sleep in a place where Madame Pomfrey could do her professional worrying at him, which he'd decided was reasonable because his body had processed an enormous amount in the final chamber and rest was efficient. Ron was asleep in the chair beside the bed, his Weasley jumper on, a half-eaten box of chocolate frogs on the bedside table. The window showed a bright winter morning. Hermione was in the other chair, awake, reading, and she looked up the moment Harry opened his eyes. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Good," Harry said. He meant it. "Dumbledore arrived 40 minutes after you went in. He got my letter." She closed her book. "Quirrell's alive. He's being transferred to St. Mungo's. He's not well, but alive." "The stone?" "Destroyed," Hermione said. "Dumbledore destroyed it once he confirmed it was intact. He said the Flammels had prepared for this possibility years ago." She paused. "He wants to speak with you." "I expect so. Are you worried about that?" Harry looked at her. "No." She considered this. "Then, you knew. When you told me to go back, you knew what was going to happen." "Roughly." "Roughly," Harry said. "I knew contact would cause a reaction. I didn't know the specific mechanism until it happened." "Your mother's magic." "Yes." Hermione was quiet for a moment. She stopped. "Started again. That's a kind of love that turned itself into armor for you." Harry looked at the ceiling. The morning light was clean and cold and very ordinary. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what it is." Ron stirred in his chair, cracked one eye open, looked at Harry, and said, finally, in the voice of someone who had been asleep for 4 hours and was not going to pretend they hadn't. "Morning," Harry said. "Don't ever do that alone again," Ron said. "I wasn't alone. You were at the chessboard. You know what I mean." Harry did know. He looked at Ron, then at Hermione, and he thought about what it meant that the two people sitting at his bedside were people who had followed him down to a three-headed dog in a series of potentially fatal obstacles without requiring a guarantee of outcome, and had done so because they trusted him, and trusted themselves, and trusted that it mattered. "I know," he said. "I won't." Outside the window the sky was extraordinarily clear. No particular reason for it. Just a good day over Scotland, the kind that happens in late December when the weather decides to be generous. Harry felt it and smiled. Chapter 5. What Gods Remember. Dumbledore's office was exactly what it looked like it would be from the outside, which Harry found either reassuring or suspicious depending on how you thought about it. Circular, warmly lit, portraits of previous headmasters sleeping in their frames with the unconvincing commitment of people who were definitely listening. Fawkes on his perch by the window, a phoenix, magnificent, currently in the early phase of his burn cycle, feathers dull and patchy, watching Harry with one brilliant eye that contained approximately 600 years of accumulated judgment. Harry sat down in the chair across from the desk and looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked back. Harry held out 2 fingers. After a moment, Fawkes stepped off his perch, crossed the room, and stepped onto Harry's arm with the careful weight distribution of a large bird that has learned to be considerate of human bone structure. He made a sound, low, resonant, a single note that wasn't quite music but sat in the same country, and looked at Harry from 6 inches away with an expression that communicated something ancient and entirely unsentimental. "He doesn't usually do that," Dumbledore said, from behind his desk. "I know," Harry said. "Phoenixes are divine creatures." He recognizes the register. Dumbledore sat down. He was wearing robes of deep midnight blue, and his half-moon glasses were on, and the expression on his face was the one Harry had been reading from across the Great Hall since September, warmth over calculation, the benevolence that was real and also a surface, both things true simultaneously. Up close, the warmth was warmer and the calculation was more evident. He was a very intelligent man, Dumbledore. Harry had never doubted that. "How are you feeling?" Dumbledore asked. "Well," Harry said. "Thank you." Madame Pomfrey was concerned. "Madame Pomfrey is thorough. I told her I was fine. She told me that was what people said when they weren't fine. We had a respectful disagreement." He stroked Fawkes absently. "I was fine." Dumbledore's eyes, very blue, watched him over the half-moon glasses with the particular quality of someone who had been assessing human beings for a very long time and knew the difference between a performance of composure and the real thing. Whatever he'd expected from this conversation, whatever version of Harry he'd built his expectations around, Harry could feel it encountering the actual person and finding the edges didn't match. "I owe you an explanation," Dumbledore said. "Several, probably," Harry said. "But we don't need to do that today." A pause. "We don't. You built a trap. The stone was bait. Voldemort came for it and was dispersed. The trap worked, broadly. The parts that didn't work are the parts worth examining." Harry met the old man's eyes. Quirrell's protection layer was designed to fail from the inside. "You didn't know that." "No," Dumbledore said quietly. "I didn't." "You trusted your faculty." "Yes. That's not a fault," Harry said. "That's a reasonable position that happened to be wrong in this specific instance. The lesson isn't don't trust people. The lesson is verify independently when the stakes are total." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "You verified independently." "In October," Harry said. "I didn't tell you because I was still mapping the full picture, and because I wanted to see how the situation developed, and because, he stopped himself being fully honest and decided to continue being fully honest, because there was no point in this conversation being anything else. And because I wanted to understand what you were building before I decided how to engage with it. You had a plan. I needed to know if the plan was good. And your assessment? The plan was mostly good. The mirror was excellent, genuinely elegant magic, the retrieval condition is the right safeguard. The sequence of protections was well constructed. The vulnerability was the human element, which is always the vulnerability. Harry handed Fawkes back to his perch, which Fawkes accepted with dignity. The prophecy, Harry said. You know it. You've known it since before I was born. Dumbledore didn't move. Yes. And you know my parents told me. I'd suspected your parents would tell you, yes. Given who they are. A pause. Given who your mother is, Hera is not the sort of person who withholds relevant information from someone she's raising. Harry looked at him. You've been watching my family. I've been aware of your family's existence, yes. Since the night I left you on that doorstep. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. His expression hadn't changed, but something underneath it had, a quality of acknowledgement, the particular weight of someone saying a true thing they've been carrying for a long time. I went back the next morning, you know. To check. To make sure Petunia had taken you in. She hadn't, Harry said. Obviously. No, Dumbledore said. You were gone. The basket was there. The letter had been placed back on the doorstep, neatly, with the deliberate precision of someone making a point. A slight pause. I looked for you. For several years. I couldn't find you. You wouldn't, Harry said. Olympus doesn't have an address in any directory you have access to. No, Dumbledore agreed. And then your Hogwarts letter arrived, delivered successfully, which meant the school's enrollment magic had found you, which meant you existed and were 11 and had a magical signature on file. He took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at Harry with his eyes unmediated. They were still very blue. I had considerable time to build expectations about who you would be. What you would be like. What you would need. And I'm not what you built, Harry said. You are very much not what I built, Dumbledore said, with something in his voice that was, Harry thought, genuine, not performed, not strategic. Something actually surprised and actually moved, and complex in the way genuine feelings are complex. I built a boy shaped by loss. A child who would need, guidance. Careful, considered guidance, toward an understanding of what lay ahead. He paused. I built someone who could be prepared. You built someone you could prepare, Harry said, without heat. Dumbledore accepted this. Yes. Perhaps that is the more honest framing. I don't need to be prepared, Harry said. I've been prepared since I was 8. I understand the prophecy. I understand what Voldemort is and what he'll become and what meeting him eventually will require. He leaned forward slightly. What I want from you, Professor, is not guidance about what I'm facing. I know what I'm facing. What I want is honesty. When you know something relevant, you tell me. Not the shaped version. Not the version you've decided I can handle. The actual information. Dumbledore was quiet for a full 10 seconds, which was a long time to be quiet when someone was watching you. That's a reasonable request, he said finally. It's not a request, Harry said, pleasantly. It's how this works from here forward, or it doesn't work. Another pause. Then, slowly, the old man smiled, a different smile from the benevolent one, something less polished and more real, the smile of someone who has just encountered something that genuinely surprised them and finds they're glad of it. Your mother, he said, would have said exactly that. Harry felt something move through him. Not destabilizing, just present, a shift in the air of the room. Which one, he said. Both, Dumbledore said. Though I suspect in somewhat different tones. Harry thought about that. Hera's voice delivering the same ultimatum, precise, absolute, the temperature of deep winter. Lily Potter's voice, he didn't know Lily's voice, but he'd read everything he could find about her, and the picture assembled was someone who had her own version of that same steel, warmer in its surface expression and no less real underneath. Both his mothers. Both telling the same truth in different registers. "Tell me about her," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. He understood immediately who Harry meant, and something in his face shifted, the calculation put down, for a moment, in favor of something older. "Lily Evans," he said. "She came to Hogwarts with a precision of mind that I have encountered perhaps 4 times in my tenure as a teacher and then as a headmaster. Not just intelligence, genuine precision, the capacity to see the actual structure of a thing rather than its surface. She was generous with it, which made it more remarkable. Most people with that kind of mind hoard it. Lily shared it freely." A pause. "She was also stubborn in a very specific way, not contrarianism, not pride. She simply had a clear view of what was right and she didn't move from it under social pressure, which is rarer than intelligence and worth considerably more." Harry listened. "She died doing what she had always done," Dumbledore said. "What was right? Not because she calculated the outcome. Because she couldn't do otherwise." He was quiet for a moment. "James was brave," Harry said. "Loyal. Somewhat reckless until he wasn't. You've read the accounts." "Every one I could find. The Hogwarts records. The Order of the Phoenix documentation. Testimonies. Letters that survived." Harry looked at the desk between them. "There's a version of me that wonders what it would have been like to know them. I allow myself to wonder. I don't let it become grief for something I never had." He paused. "I had parents. I have parents. What I also have is the knowledge of 2 extraordinary people whose decision on a night I don't remember made me what I am. That's not nothing. It's everything," Dumbledore said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "It is." He left the office 20 minutes later, having covered, in additional conversation, the Philosopher's Stone's destruction, the Flamel's decision, the current status of Voldemort, dispersed but not gone, somewhere cold and remote, waiting, and the shape of the years ahead. Dumbledore did not tell him everything. Harry didn't expect him to. You didn't rebuild a mode of operation in one conversation, and Dumbledore was a man who had been moving pieces on a board for 70 years and couldn't simply stop. But there was something different in the exchange by the end, a recalibrated quality, and Harry found that sufficient for now. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the bright December afternoon, and when he passed a window he looked out at the sky, and the sky was doing what it had been doing since he woke up in the hospital wing, that extraordinary clarity, cloud-free, the particular electric blue that was Zeus in a good mood. He went up to the dormitory, which was empty, and sat on his bed and wrote to his parents. He wrote to Hera first, as he always did when both needed writing, not because he loved her more but because Hera processed information in real time and Zeus processed events in retrospect, and matching the medium to the reader was something Hera herself had taught him. The stone is destroyed and Voldemort is dispersed. He had been using Professor Quirrell as a host. The confrontation in the final chamber produced the expected result from the sacrificial magic. Direct contact was incompatible with his presence, and he separated from Quirrell and fled. Quirrell is alive and in care. Dumbledore and I spoke this morning. I told him directly that our arrangement going forward requires his honesty. He agreed. I believe he meant it, to the extent that a man of his habits can mean it immediately. I'll verify over time. The Hogwarts year is almost over. I'm ready to come home for the summer. Tell Father the sky has been beautiful. He'll know what I mean. Then he wrote to Zeus, which was shorter, because Zeus's letters back were better when Harry gave him room to respond rather than filling all the available space. We won. You can stop being dramatic about the weather now, though I didn't mind it. I want to learn something new this summer. The soul fragment extraction was good, the anchoring technique. I want to go further with extraction and purification work. I think it'll be relevant. Also, I want to go to the sea for a week. Not Poseidon's Sea specifically, just somewhere with good horizon line. See you in 3 days. He folded both letters, gave them to Hedwig, who had been waiting with the patient certainty of someone who has a job and takes it seriously, and she left through the open window into the blue afternoon. He lay back on his bed and looked at the ceiling. The year unrolled behind him, the train, the platform, the sorting. Ron's chess. Hermione's logic. The troll. The night sky through the landing window. Flying above the pitch in Scottish dawn. Quirrell's face at dinner and Snape's face in the potions classroom and McGonagall's face when he'd done something that required her to update her framework. Dumbledore this morning, the calculation briefly set down. He thought about the chamber. The voice of the thing on the back of Quirrell's head, and what it had felt like to hear it say "I killed your parents" and to hold that sentence in his hands and decide what to do with it. He had not been unmoved. He wanted to be honest about that, at least in the privacy of his own thoughts. He had stood in that room and heard that sentence and something in him had felt it, felt the weight of what it referred to, 2 people who had died so he could live, and the thing that had killed them standing 6 feet away and saying it with the expectation that it would destroy him. It hadn't destroyed him. But it had landed. That was the thing about being well-loved and genuinely powerful and entirely unbroken, it didn't mean you were impermeable. It meant you could feel things without being undone by them. The grief and the steadiness could both be true at once. The love and the loss. The strength and the ache underneath it. He lay on the ceiling and let it all be true. Then he got up and went to find Ron, because he wanted lunch and company and something uncomplicated, and Ron was reliably excellent at being exactly what the moment needed. The train back to London was familiar and strange in the reversed way, the same compartment, the same landscape running backward through the windows, the same quality of transition, going from one world toward another. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione as the countryside moved, and they talked about the year in the unsystematic way that made end-of-year conversations different from any other kind, non-linear, associative, jumping between moments without needing the moments to connect except through the shared experience of having been there for all of them. Best thing, Ron said. Objective best thing of the year. Go. The chess board, Hermione said immediately. Ron blinked. You're saying that? That's your best thing? You were extraordinary, Hermione said, with the precise directness she used when she was stating something factual rather than offering comfort. The way you read that board in under a minute. The sacrifice you made to open the Queen's path. I've thought about it and I cannot reconstruct the calculation that fast, Ron. I genuinely cannot. Ron looked at her for a moment with an expression of someone receiving something they wanted enough that receiving it was almost too much. He turned to look out the window. Right, he said, casually. Well. Thanks. Harry said nothing and let the moment be. Yours? Hermione asked Harry. He thought about it properly. The year had had many moments. He chose the true one. The Weasley jumper, he said. Ron turned back from the window. The jumper. Your mother made it for me, Harry said. She's never met me. I'm her son's school friend. She made me a jumper with my initial on it because that's what she does for the people who matter to her, and she decided I mattered to her without needing to be in the room with me to decide it. He paused. That's the best thing. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she'll want to meet you this summer. I'd like that, Harry said. She'll feed you until you can't move. I'd like that too. Hermione was watching Harry with that look again, the one that was about something she was working out, turning over. She'd had it intermittently since the hospital wing. He waited. The sacrificial magic, she said finally. In the chamber. That was the protection your mother put on you. Yes. And you knew it would work like that. Contact with Voldemort. The incompatibility. I knew it would produce a reaction. I worked out the probable mechanism in advance. But you didn't know for certain, she said. You went in there without being certain it would work. Harry looked at her. It was the most likely outcome based on available evidence. It wasn't a guarantee. Very few things are guarantees. Harry, Hermione said, and there was something in her voice that was not the analytical register, something more immediate. If it hadn't worked, it worked. But if it hadn't, Hermione, he said, gently. I went in there knowing that either my mother's magic would do what I believed it would do, or I would need to find another mechanism in real time. I was not frightened. I was prepared. He met her eyes. I am not going to tell you I was completely certain of the outcome and that there was no risk, because that wouldn't be true. There was risk. I assessed it and proceeded. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't get to just decide that risk is acceptable when the risk is you, she said. I do, actually, Harry said. It's my risk to decide about. Not entirely, she said. Not anymore. The compartment was quiet. Harry held her gaze. He understood what she meant, and he understood that she was right about it, and he understood that being right about it was a relatively new development in his life, that the algebra of risk had changed because there were people in it now whose stakes in his survival were not strategic but personal. Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay. You're right. It's not entirely my risk anymore. He looked between her and Ron. I'll factor that in. Ron, who had been watching this exchange with the attention he gave chess positions, said, that's the most important thing anyone said all year. Bigger than the chessboard? Hermione said. Much bigger than the chessboard, Ron said. The chessboard was tactics. That was strategy. Harry laughed, and it cleared the air, and they settled back into the easy rhythm of the journey, and outside the window England went by in its familiar green and grey way, the sky above it clean and wide. King's Cross came, and the barrier, and the other side of it, the ordinary noisy world of the station, non-magical, beautifully human and mundane. Hermione's parents were waiting, a neat couple, slightly overwhelmed by the crowd, her mother spotting her first and the expression on her face when she did being the particular expression of a parent whose child has been away and who has missed them more than they planned to. Harry watched the reunion from a few feet back, not out of exclusion but out of respect for the privacy of it, and thought about Hera meeting him at the station the one time he'd asked her to come to London for a shopping trip, standing on the pavement outside with the specific quality of stillness she had in mortal spaces, and the way she'd looked at him when he came out of the tube station, that brief, unguarded moment of relief that was too fast and too real to be anything but love. Mrs. Weasley descended on the group like a natural force. She was exactly what her letters and Ron's descriptions had built her to be, and also entirely herself in ways that descriptions couldn't fully capture, large-hearted, sharp-eyed, warm with the specific warmth of someone who had spent their life loving people with their whole capacity. She hugged Ron for a long time. She ruffled Ginny's hair. She turned to Harry. Harry Potter, she said, and looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, taking him in, assembling the real person over the constructed image, and arriving at something genuine very quickly. I've heard so much about you. I've heard a great deal about you too, Harry said. Thank you for the jumper. She looked at the jumper, currently under his school robe, and her whole face softened. You're wearing it. It's warm, Harry said. She made a sound and hugged him, which was different from being hugged by Hera. Hera's hugs were precise and intentional, a specific delivery of warmth, and different from being hugged by Zeus, which was more like being embraced by weather. Molly Weasley's hug was neither of those things. It was simply someone who decided you needed it and gave it without making a calculation about whether it was appropriate. Harry hugged her back. Come to the Burrow this summer, she said, pulling back, still holding his shoulders. Both of you, you and Hermione both, if she wants. We've got room. Thank you, Harry said. I'd really like that. He meant it fully, which he could hear in his own voice, and which she heard too, her expression going briefly, genuinely moved. Then she collected herself and turned to organize her children with the specific authority of someone who had been doing it for over a decade and remained very good at it. Harry stood on the platform and looked at the family in motion, Ron arguing with George about something in an entirely friendly way, Ginny watching Harry with wide eyes that she looked away from immediately when he noticed, Mr. Weasley shaking hands with Mr. Granger with the eager enthusiasm of someone who finds muggles fascinating and is barely containing it, and he breathed it all in. Then his transport arrived. Not a car, not a train. Just a shift in the air quality above the station roof, a specific kind of charge that only Harry could feel, and the sensation of being known from a great height, the sky paying specific attention to one particular point on its surface. He looked up. "That's your ride?" Ron said, having noticed the change in Harry's expression. "More or less," Harry said. He picked up Hedwig's cage and his trunk, which he'd reduced to pocket size for transport. He turned to Ron. "Summer." "Summer," Ron confirmed. "Mum'll write your parents." "She can try," Harry said, smiling. "The address is complicated." He said goodbye to Hermione, who hugged him with the precision of someone who doesn't do it often and means it completely when they do, and he walked to the far end of the platform where it was less crowded, and he looked up again. The column of warm air that descended around him was Olympian transport, not showy, not dramatic, just the king of the gods reaching one hand down through the atmosphere and lifting what he loved back to where it belonged. Harry felt it take hold, the familiar sensation of altitude without effort, the ground falling away below him without falling away from him, and he rose through the roof of King's Cross and through the London air and through the cloud layer and into the bright, clean sky above it. Zeus was waiting. Not in his full divine aspect, that was the kind of thing that required significant advance warning for anyone in the vicinity, but in his preferred informal form, standing in the open sky with the complete ease of someone who genuinely didn't need it beneath him, broad and bright and grinning with the enormous unconstrained joy he reserved for private moments. He caught Harry by the arm and pulled him into a hug that was exactly like being embraced by weather. "There he is," Zeus said. "My boy." "Hello," Harry said, muffled. "We heard everything. Hera has read your letter 4 times and will deny it. I've been sending good weather since Tuesday." He held Harry back at arm's length and looked at him with those eyes, gold-flecked, deep, the eyes of something that governed storms. "You're all right." "I'm all right," Harry said. "You touched Voldemort," Zeus said, and the name in his mouth had a completely different quality than it had in anyone else's, not fearful, not hushed, not weighted with collective trauma. Just a fact that Zeus was handling with the particular contempt of someone who had stared down considerably larger things. "I touched him," Harry said. "Mum's magic did the work." Zeus looked at him. "Both your mothers would argue with that framing." "Both my mothers argue with most of my framings." "They're usually right," Zeus said, and his grin came back, and they moved through the high sky toward Olympus, father and son, the clouds below them and the sun above them at this altitude genuinely magnificent, and Harry felt the thing that had been sitting quietly under his sternum since October finally, fully settle. He was home. Olympus in summer was something that had to be experienced at the full register, not just seen but felt, the warmth of it, the light, the specific quality of a place that existed at the intersection of divine will and genuine history. The mountain bloomed in July in ways that defied botanical convention, flowers that responded to the emotional weather of the palace rather than the meteorological weather of the region, which meant the gardens were extravagant when things were good and restrained when they were complicated and currently, in this particular early July, absolutely extraordinary. Hera was in the garden when they arrived. She did not run. Hera didn't run. She stood up from the bench where she'd been reading with the composed efficiency of someone moving with purpose, and when Harry came through the archway she crossed the intervening space at a pace that was technically walking and walked directly into him, and held on. She said nothing. Harry said nothing either. After a moment she pulled back and looked at his face with the comprehensive attention she gave to things she needed to know the full status of, and he met her eyes and let her look. "Good," she said finally. "I told you. You tell me you're fine as a default position." It doesn't always mean the same thing. She looked at him for another second. This time it does. This time it does, he confirmed. She touched the scar on his forehead briefly, 2 fingers, the same way she touched it when she removed the soul fragment 3 weeks before the school year, checking, as she always checked, as she had probably been checking in her mind for the last 10 months every time the thought occurred to her that it was there. Clean. Old tissue. A mark of survival. Come, she said. Eat something. Tell me everything in order. He spent the first week of summer simply being on Olympus, sleeping in his own room in the way that felt like something fitted back into the correct position, eating at the table where the food appeared when wanted, flying in the sky that belonged to his father in the most literal sense, running the Eastern training ground kata each morning with the additional muscle memory of a year of wand work and a year of navigating Hogwarts and a year of being among people layered over the foundational practice like new growth over stone. He was different from who he'd been in September. Not in the way he'd expected, not more world-weary, not carrying visible damage, not changed in the ways that change tends to leave marks. He was more himself than he'd been when he left. The year had added dimensions rather than taking anything away. Zeus noticed it on the 3rd day. They were in the training ground, Harry working through the kata while Zeus watched with the critical attention he gave everything Harry practiced, and Zeus said, "You're moving differently." Better or worse? More settled, Zeus said, which was a precise distinction. You were always controlled. Now the control isn't work. You've integrated something. Harry considered this. The year put me among people, he said. People I care about. It changes the geometry, you move differently when there are things you're moving to protect as well as things you're moving to accomplish. Zeus nodded slowly, looking at him. Your mother said that would happen. Which one? A pause. Hera, Zeus said. Then, though I suspect Lily Potter would have said the same thing. Harry stopped the kata. He looked at his father. Tell me about them, he said. Lily and James. Tell me what you know. Zeus sat down on the training ground wall, a thing he did when he wanted to talk rather than observe, and said, We found out about them when we found you. After we took you, we looked into who they were. Lily Potter was a Muggle-born witch who was considered one of the most powerful charms practitioners of her generation. She also had a genuine warmth, a capacity for love, that was, even by mortal standards, remarkable. We've seen it work, Harry. It wasn't abstract for her. The night she stood between you and a killing curse and refused to step aside when Voldemort offered her the chance to live, she knew what she was doing. She understood the mechanism even if she didn't know she understood it. She was choosing to make her love into something permanent. He paused. That's not nothing. That's rare even among gods. Harry stood in the training ground and let this in. James Potter, Zeus continued, was a different sort. Brash. Loyal. Brave in the way that doesn't calculate, which can be foolishness but in the right character becomes something else, becomes a kind of integrity. He was in the Order of the Phoenix during the worst years of Voldemort's first rise and he fought well. He died because he went for his wand in another room, no wand in hand, front door open, trying to buy Lily time to run. It was the right choice, even if it wasn't enough. Harry was quiet. They would know you, Zeus said, which was a specific thing to say, and Zeus had thought about saying it, Harry could tell. If they could see you. They'd recognize you, not the version of you they imagined in the year they had with you, but you, the actual person. They'd know you were theirs. Harry let out a slow breath. I know, he said. I've always known that. Good, Zeus said. Then carry it like what it is. Not grief. History. The history that made the present possible. Later that night Harry stood on the highest point of the Olympian Palace, the place where the mountain tapered to a point and the sky wrapped all the way around with no edge anywhere visible, and he looked out at the dark and thought about a night in Godric's Hollow that he would never remember. A woman standing between her child and something terrible, choosing love over survival, not as sacrifice but as affirmation, this is what matters, this is what's real, this is what I will not let be taken. He touched the scar. He made a promise. Not spoken aloud, not theatrical, just internal, quiet, the kind that lives in the bone rather than the air. I know what you gave me. I know what it cost. I will not let it have been spent on someone who didn't know what to do with it. I'll make it mean something. I already am. The sky above him was enormous and absolutely clear. Every star visible. The galaxy visible, in this altitude and this clarity, spread across the dark in its genuine shape, not the compressed ground-level view, but the full thing, as seen from a height that had always been home. Harry stood in it and was very still and very whole and very present. Below somewhere, in a world he'd chosen and would keep choosing, his friends were spending their summer. Ron at the Burrow with his large, loud, generous family. Hermione in a house that smelled like dental equipment and had bookshelves in every room. Neville with his grandmother, learning things about his own past that were going to matter. Draco Malfoy in a manor that had too many rules and not enough love, becoming the shape that would eventually need to be chosen against or chosen toward. And somewhere cold and remote, not present but not gone, the thing that had killed his parents waited in the way things wait when they have nothing left but patience. He thought about it and was not afraid. He thought about it and made a second promise, this one not to Lily and James but to himself, precise and clear. Not yet. Not next year, probably. Maybe not for years. But eventually I will face you in full, and it will be finished, and the world you spent 30 years tearing at will keep going without you in it. I look forward to that. The wind came up, mountain high and cold and enormous, and Harry stood in it and let it move through him, and the stars were brilliant and the sky was home, and somewhere below his father was asleep and his mother was reading and the summer was still long. He went back inside. Chapter 6, The Sky Declares War. September came back around the way it always did, with a particular quality of light that didn't exist in any other month, the year tilting toward its darker half while still pretending not to, the mornings sharp and the afternoons golden and the whole thing carrying a sense of threshold, of standing on an edge about to step off. Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 and felt it all exactly as it was. The summer had been the best of his life, which was saying something given that his life had started on Olympus. 3 weeks at the Burrow in August had done something to him that he hadn't fully anticipated. The Weasley household was chaos in the specific, productive way that large families with strong individual personalities generate chaos, every room doing something different, the garden conducting ongoing experiments in gnome tolerance, Percy reading something important in the corner and being ignored about it, Fred and George conducting what they called research and everyone else called property damage. Ron at the center of it, the same Ron from the compartment but more himself, more expansive, on his own ground. Mrs. Weasley had fed Harry until the concept of hunger became theoretical, and had asked him about his parents with the careful courtesy of someone who understood the situation was unusual and wanted to get it right, and Harry had told her about Zeus and Hera with the straightforward ease he'd long since developed for the topic, and her eyes had gotten very wide, and then she'd said, well, they raised you well, and that's what matters, which Harry thought was probably the most sensible possible response. Hermione had come for the last week. She and Ron had argued about something within the first 40 minutes, Harry couldn't remember what, some combination of spellwork theory and chess strategy that had wandered into general principle, and then had settled into a companionable arguing rhythm that was clearly going to be a permanent feature of their dynamic, and which Harry found consistently entertaining. 2 weeks on Olympus after that, working with Zeus on the extraction technique he'd asked about, the ability to identify in separate soul fragments, to purify the space they'd occupied, to work with the mechanics of dark tethering magic from the outside. It was delicate work, the kind that required the precision of Hera's teaching and the raw atmospheric authority of Zeus's domain, and Harry had spent 12 days pushing at the edges of both and come away knowing something he hadn't known before, a specific new capability that sat in his chest like a key waiting for a lock. He hadn't needed to explain to either parent why he was learning it. They knew. The timeline of Voldemort's return was uncertain but the shape of it was not, and Harry intended to be ready for the full shape of it when it arrived. Not reactive. Ready. Now the platform was doing its September thing, and the Hogwarts Express was doing its September thing, and Harry was doing his September thing, which was arriving 15 minutes early because he found the gradual filling of the platform more interesting than the rushed version. Ron arrived with his family at 12:40, the whole Weasley contingent moving like a weather system, Ginny among them for the first time, wide-eyed and trying not to look wide-eyed, which Harry thought she managed about 60% successfully. She was braver than she thought she was, he'd worked that out at the Burrow. The way she held herself when she was uncertain was the way someone holds themselves when they're choosing not to show something, which was courage, just the interior kind. He caught her eye as the family moved down the platform and nodded. She blinked and nodded back and stood slightly straighter. Ron detached from the family group and fell into step beside Harry. "Brilliant summer," he said, with the completeness of a verdict. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Better than last year?" "Different than last year," Harry said. "Better implies they're comparable. They're not really the same category of thing." Ron thought about this. The Burrow versus Olympus. The Burrow versus the Philosopher's Stone. Fair point. Ron looked at the train. "What do you think this year brings?" Harry had been thinking about this since mid-August, when the first pieces of it had started arriving in his awareness, indirect, partial, the way things came into focus when you were paying attention to the edges rather than the center. "Something different," he said. "Something older." Ron looked at him. "Older than Voldemort possessing a professor?" "Different kind of old," Harry said. "We'll see." Hermione arrived at 12:50 with both her parents in tow, her mother the same neat, slightly overwhelmed woman from last year and her father slightly taller than Harry remembered, shaking hands with Muggle precision, asking about the school with genuine curiosity rather than polite performance. Harry liked him immediately. Hermione said her goodbyes with the composed affection of someone who had negotiated the balance between loving her parents and loving her independent life, and came aboard the train with the particular purposeful energy she always had at the beginning of things. "Good summer?" Harry asked. "Very," she said. "I read 14 books. For pleasure. 11 of them." "What were the other 3? "Research." She sat down. "About Hogwarts history. Second-year curriculum. And one about," she paused. "One about the Chamber of Secrets." Harry looked at her. "Tell me." "Not much to tell, yet. It's historical, mostly. Salazar Slytherin built it, supposedly, before he left the school. The accounts conflict on the details. Some say it contains a monster. Some say it was sealed when Slytherin left and never opened." She was watching Harry's face. "You're not surprised?" "I'm waiting to be surprised," he said. "Tell me if you find something specific." The train moved. The year began. It announced itself differently from the first year, not the bright shock of the entirely new but the more complicated arrival of something familiar that had changed while you weren't looking, or perhaps that you changed relative to while you were. Hogwarts felt the same and felt different, the way a house does when you've been somewhere else for summer and come back and the proportions are briefly strange. The castle met them as it always did, solid and enormous and deeply itself. Harry stepped off the boats. Second years had carriages, but Harry had walked instead, wanting the approach, and looked up at the lit towers and felt the place recognize him. It did, he was fairly sure. Old magical buildings developed a kind of institutional awareness, a residual sentience assembled from centuries of human magic and emotion and intention. Hogwarts was the oldest and the most of this. Harry felt its awareness register his presence the way a large, attentive thing registers the return of something it knows. He nodded at the castle. He was fairly sure this was not something most people did. The Great Hall. The sorting of new first years. Harry watched the new Gryffindors arrive at the table and felt the specific protectiveness that second years apparently developed automatically toward first years, which had not been something he predicted about himself but appeared to be accurate. The feast. The noise. The enchanted ceiling doing its September thing, autumn stars over a hall full of people who were all, in different ways, home. Then the noise happened at the entrance. 2 students, carried into the great hall petrified, stiff, chalk-white, eyes wide and glassy and entirely absent, seeing nothing. Colin Creevey, a Gryffindor first year with a camera who Harry had clocked on the train as someone who would be enthusiastic and well-meaning. Justin Finch-Fletchley from Hufflepuff. Both of them rigid and motionless, the specific quality of petrification distinct from sleep, distinct from unconsciousness, fully conscious but entirely immobilized. The hall went silent with the specific quality of 200 people confronting something that doesn't have a category in their expected experience of the evening. Dumbledore's face at the head table went to its professional composure, which was a different thing from his warm benevolence, harder, more focused. McGonagall was on her feet. Snape, Harry noticed, was very still in the particular way of someone who is processing information against existing knowledge and arriving at a conclusion they already suspected. Harry looked at the petrified students for a moment. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at the walls. "What is it?" Hermione said quietly, beside him. She'd seen where he was looking. "Something in the castle," Harry said, equally quiet. "Something that's been here a while. Maybe a very long while." "The chamber," she said. "Yes. It's open. Something opened it." He paused. "Or someone." "Writing on the wall," Ron said, from his other side, tipping his head to indicate the far wall of the great hall near the entrance, where Harry could see, in large letters that looked dark against the stone, had been written in something that had dried to dark, the message he'd been half expecting since Hermione mentioned her research on the train. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." And hanging beneath the words, stiff and rigid, "Mrs. Norris. Filch's cat." Harry read the message. Read it again. Looked at the petrified cat. And thought, here we go. The year moved with the momentum of something building. Not all at once, Hogwarts didn't descend into panic cleanly, it descended into anxiety with denial on top of it, which was messier and in some ways worse. The staff held emergency meetings. Students whispered in corridors. The writing on the wall was cleaned off within a day, but the fact of it wasn't cleaned off at all, it just moved inside everyone's heads where it continued doing its work. The attacks were spaced. Another petrification. Then another. The pattern was there if you looked for it, the victims had something in common, a category the message had announced but that no one wanted to fully examine. Muggle-born students. Half-bloods. Enemies of the air. Slytherin's heir. The legend attached to the chamber was specific, Slytherin had built it, Slytherin's monster lived in it, and Slytherin's true heir would have the power to control it. The school had started looking at the Slytherin table with the uneasy logic of well, who else? And the Slytherin table had noticed being looked at, and the tension in the corridors was doing what tension always does when it doesn't have a clear target, it spread sideways. Harry moved through all of it with the same quality of attention he'd given to Quirrell in the first year, watching, mapping, building the picture. He was also, in parallel, dealing with a different problem entirely. The Dursleys had apparently acquired a house elf. This was the explanation he arrived at for the small creature that had appeared in his dormitory on the second night back and had been watching him sleep, which he'd woken to with the equanimity of someone who had grown up on Olympus and was not easily startled by supernatural visitors in general. The house elf, enormous eyes, bat-like ears, wearing a pillowcase with the resigned dignity of someone making the best of their uniform, had introduced itself as Dobby and had immediately burst into tears. Harry sat up in bed and looked at it. "Hello," he said. "Harry Potter," Dobby said, in a voice that was managing to be both very small and very intense. "Dobby has come to warn Harry Potter. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts." Harry looked at him. "Why?" "There is a plot, Harry Potter. A terrible plot." Dobby cannot say more, Dobby should not have said that much. The elf proceeded to slam his head into the bedpost with the startling self-punitive efficiency of someone following a rule they genuinely hated. Harry reached out and stopped the second repetition with one hand. "Don't do that," Harry said, without drama. Dobby froze. Stared up at him. Harry Potter stopped. "I stopped you hitting yourself in the head," Harry said. "Which is not something you should be doing." "Who made that a rule?" Dobby's enormous eyes filled with tears again. "Dobby's masters. Your masters told you to punish yourself?" A trembling nod. Harry looked at Dobby for a long moment. The creature was terrified, genuinely terrified, the specific terror of something that has lived in fear for long enough that fear is the baseline and everything else is variation. And underneath the terror, something else, genuine concern. Whatever Dobby had come here to communicate, he had come because he wanted to, because he'd made a decision to act on something he cared about, at considerable personal risk. That was courage. The interior kind. "Tell me what you can," Harry said. "I won't ask you to say anything that endangers you." Dobby's chin wobbled. Harry Potter is very kind." Dobby was told Harry Potter was great but not that Harry Potter was kind. "Tell me," Harry said gently. What Dobby could tell him was limited by whatever binding prevented specifics, but it was still information. There was a plot to reopen the Chamber of Secrets. The plot involved someone at Hogwarts. The purpose was to discredit Dumbledore, drive Muggleborns out of the school, and use the resulting chaos toward darker ends. Someone was using the chamber as a tool. "Someone opened it," Harry said. "A person. With the ability to control the creature inside." Dobby couldn't confirm that. But his expression, the complicated misery of something that wanted very badly to say yes, was its own confirmation. "Who is your master, Dobby?" Harry asked. Dobby made a sound and grabbed the bedpost, clearly fighting an enormous internal battle. "It's all right," Harry said. "You don't have to say it." He didn't need Dobby to say it. The pieces were assembling themselves with the quiet efficiency they always did when he paid attention. The message on the wall, enemies of the air. The specific targeting of Muggleborns. The chamber as a tool for political ends. The timing of it, second year, Dumbledore under pressure, the school's status in the ministry being actively managed by certain interested parties. And Dobby's expression when Harry said, "Who is your master?" which was the expression of someone whose master was a name that required that reaction. Lucius Malfoy, Harry thought. And behind Lucius Malfoy, something older. He let Dobby leave. The elf went in the specific way of house elves, with a crack of displaced air and genuine reluctance, pausing at the last moment to look at Harry with those enormous eyes in a way that communicated something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite apology but was in the general territory of both. Harry lay back in the dark dormitory, the other boys breathing their undisturbed sleep, and thought. He thought about Tom Riddle, aged 16, and what a 16-year-old with Voldemort's specific psychology would have built into a diary. He thought about Ginny Weasley, bright and brave and 11 years old, and what a Horcrux diary would look for in a host. He thought about the chamber, and the monster, and Parseltongue, and the things Hera had told him about basilisks when they'd reviewed the relevant magical creatures together before the school year, thorough as always, because Hera didn't leave gaps. He thought about the soul fragment extraction technique he'd spent 12 days learning on Olympus over the summer, the specific new capability sitting in his chest like a key. He found the locket fit in the dark, lying in his dormitory bed, and everything settled into a shape. He slept soundly after that. The next 3 months were, objectively speaking, a great deal. Lockhart arrived as defense against the dark arts teacher with the comprehensive self-assurance of a man whose sense of his own importance had been cultivated with such dedication that it had achieved a kind of architectural stability. You couldn't shake it because it was no longer dependent on external validation, it simply was. He was also, Harry established in the first lesson, not actually capable of performing most of the magic he'd written 7 best-selling books about. Harry sat in Lockhart's first class and watched him with the quality of attention that most people found disconcerting when they became aware of it, and Lockhart became aware of it about 20 minutes in, when Harry looked at the wand movement Lockhart demonstrated and said, mildly, "That's the wrong grip for that charm. You'll lose the directional control." Lockhart looked at him. The smile stayed perfectly in place, because the smile was structural. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Harry. The grip that actually works is this one, Harry said, and demonstrated, and the charm worked cleanly, and the class watched Lockhart smile do something complicated. Yes, well, Lockhart said. Very good. Ron, afterward, said, you did that on purpose. I did that because it was wrong and someone in the class might have tried it and hurt themselves, Harry said. You also did it on purpose, Ron said. Harry didn't argue. Hermione's investigation into the chamber moved forward with the systematic focus she brought to everything that mattered to her. She compiled historical accounts, cross-referenced them, built a working theory of the creature, something that fits the pattern of the petrifications, something that acts through indirect contact, something that moves through the castle's plumbing. Her conclusion, a basilisk, ancient, Slytherin's basilisk, came in November, delivered to Harry and Ron in the library with the quiet precision of someone presenting a research finding. Basilisk, Harry said. You already knew, she said. I suspected. Your research confirms it. You could have, she stopped. You confirmed it before I did. You confirmed it independently, Harry said. Which is more reliable than me telling you. I don't have your sources. You built the conclusion from evidence. He met her eyes. That matters. She looked at him for a moment. Sometimes, she said, you're genuinely kind. I'm always genuine, Harry said. Sometimes that looks like kindness. The attacks continued. The school's anxiety ratcheted upward. The dueling club happened, Lockhart's dueling club, which was, as most of Lockhart's projects were, an opportunity for Lockhart to be impressive that went sideways when the actual situation exceeded the brief. Harry put Draco Malfoy on his back in 3 seconds. He hadn't intended to be quite that fast. He'd intended to demonstrate the disarming charm in a way that was thorough and educational. But Draco came in fast and confident and with the specific edge of someone who had been telling himself all year that the problem was Harry not understanding the correct hierarchy, and Harry's response was automatic and entirely beyond argument, a flick, a word, and Draco's wand arced across the room and Draco sat down on the floor with the expression of someone whose foundational assumptions have just been revised. The hall went very quiet. Draco looked up at Harry from the floor. Harry looked down at him. Good form on the initial movement, Harry said. Your grip is right and your stance is balanced. What you haven't learned yet is that speed isn't the same thing as speed and accuracy together. Draco stared at him. The calculation in those gray eyes was working hard, Harry could see it, the same calculation that had been running in some form since the train in first year, the ongoing attempt to categorize a person who didn't fit the available categories. How, Draco said, which was not the start of a specific question but the whole question compressed into one word. Practice, Harry said. And knowing what you're doing. He held out his hand. A moment. Draco looked at the hand. Then he took it, let himself be pulled up, and retrieved his wand from the floor with the precise composure of someone who has decided that maintaining dignity is the priority. He looked at Harry for a long moment. You're not what I thought you were, Draco said. No, Harry agreed. I'm not. What are you? Exactly what you can see, Harry said. Nothing hidden. Nothing managed. He paused. You could try the same thing, you know. It's lighter. Draco looked at him with the expression of someone who has understood a sentence and doesn't know what to do with it yet. The dueling club collapsed shortly after when the snake Draco conjured turned on Justin Finch-Fletchley and Harry spoke to it. Parseltongue. The sound of it moved through the room like a current, strange, sibilant, clearly not English, clearly a language, and the room's reaction was immediate and unanimous and entirely wrong. They thought he'd set the snake on Justin. He'd told it to stop. Harry stood in the afterword of the dueling club and understood that sometimes the truth of a thing and the apparent truth of a thing moved apart from each other, and there was no bridge except time and evidence, and that was all right. He could wait. Ron and Hermione believed him. That was enough for the current moment. The thing that moved him to act was not any one piece, not the continuing attacks, not the Parseltongue incident, not the voices in the walls that he'd been tracking for 2 months as the basilisk moved through the pipe system. It was Ginny. He saw it in November and confirmed it in December, the way she looked after the attacks. Not frightened the way the other students were frightened, with the external, ambient anxiety of people near something terrible. Frightened with the interior, specific guilt of someone who was near something terrible from the inside. She was losing herself in increments. He could see it, the brightness dimming, the bravery retreating, something replacing it that wasn't Ginny but wore her face and moved in her body and was borrowing her hands for its own purposes. The diary. Harry found it in February. Not by searching. He found it by watching where Ginny was trying not to go and then going there, the second-floor girls' bathroom, which moaning Myrtle haunted with the particular possessive grief of someone who died there and considered it her specific real estate. The diary was in the U-bend, which Ginny had clearly thrown it there in a moment of desperate attempt to end the connection and which hadn't worked because connections like that didn't end with disposal. Harry sat on the bathroom floor and held the diary, which was small and black and had T.M. Riddle on the cover in faded ink, and felt the thing inside it. He knew what it was now. He'd been working toward naming it all summer, and the name had come to him in October, a Horcrux. A piece of soul, torn from the main by an act of murder, housed in an object to anchor the creator to life. Voldemort had made himself immortal through fragmentation, which was, Harry thought, a profoundly accurate metaphor for what he'd done to himself in the general sense. This was the piece inside the diary. 16-year-old Tom Riddle, the most capable student Hogwarts had ever seen, who had looked into the darkness and chosen it with both hands open. Harry sat with the diary for a long time. He could feel the Horcrux reaching for him. Testing the edges. Looking for a way in, for a mind it could work with, for the specific combination of grief and need and impressionability it had found in Ginny. It found Harry instead and encountered something that made it recoil, the same incompatibility the presence in Quirrell had encountered, his mother's magic and his own divine nature together forming something the Horcrux had no mechanism for. Harry opened the diary. He wrote, "Hello, Tom." A long pause. Ink appeared on the page. Harry Potter. "I've been expecting you." "I've been expecting you too," Harry wrote. "Though I expected you to have Ginny with you. She's been resting. She's very tired. I've been quite demanding of her. But she'll be available again when needed." Harry read this and felt something cold and steady move through him. Not anger, exactly. The specific quality of resolve that comes when you have been patient for a long time and the moment for patience is over. "You don't have Ginny anymore," Harry wrote. "You've had her for months and I've let it go further than I should have. That's on me." A pause. Then, "Let it go further. You've been watching. Mapping the situation," Harry wrote. "Understanding the full shape before acting. It's something I do. You're very calm for someone who's holding a piece of Voldemort's soul." "I've held a piece of it before," Harry wrote. "I had one removed from my own forehead last summer. This is familiar territory." The ink was still for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Impressive," Riddle wrote. "You're not like what I expected from the prophecy. The boy who lived should be broken." Harry wrote. "Frightened? Running on borrowed courage and unprocessed grief?" "Yes. I know what you expected," Harry wrote. "I also know what you are. A fragment. A decision made at 16 by someone who hadn't yet understood the cost of what he was choosing. You're not Voldemort. You're the piece of him that still thought he was going to win without paying for it." The ink appeared slowly, which Harry had never seen it do before. "You intend to destroy me?" "Yes," Harry wrote. "You'll need a basilisk fang. Or something similarly venomous to magical objects. You can't simply will a Horcrux out of existence." "I know," Harry wrote. "I'm in the chamber already. Or I will be in approximately 20 minutes. You're going to call the basilisk and I'm going to use its fawn. A long pause. Harry could feel the Horcrux working, trying to find the angle, the leverage, the approach. It was 16 years old and it had been brilliant at 16. It was also, currently, genuinely uncertain, and uncertainty in a Horcrux was something Harry found interesting. It meant the intelligence inside it was real enough to recognize an unfamiliar situation and know it was unfamiliar. You're going to walk into the Chamber of Secrets, Riddle wrote, alone, to face a 1,000-year-old basilisk, using a plan that requires the basilisk to cooperate with its own defeat. More or less, Harry wrote. That's insane. That's Thursday, Harry wrote, and closed the diary. He told Ron and Hermione that evening. Ron said, "Right, we're coming." Hermione said, "Tell me the full plan in detail." Harry told them the full plan in detail, which was the deal he'd made in the hospital wing in first year, and both of them listened without interrupting, which was how he knew they were taking it seriously. "The Horcrux is in the diary," Harry said. "Tom Riddle's shade is in the chamber. Ginny is, she's been losing herself to the connection for months. When the shade calls her into the chamber, she'll be in genuine danger. I need to get her out first." "How do you know he'll call her tonight?" Ron said. "Because I told him I was coming," Harry said. "He'll want an audience and a hostage. That's how he thinks, control through leverage." He paused. "It's also why he'll be in the chamber when I get there instead of anywhere else. I've given him a reason to stay in one place." Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when she was processing multiple things simultaneously, and one of them was mild alarm. "You told a piece of Voldemort's soul that you were coming to destroy it." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't sneak up on people," Harry said. "If I'm coming for you, I'll tell you I'm coming. It's more honest and it tends to clarify the situation for everyone involved." Hermione stared at him. Ron nodded with the slow gravity of someone encountering a philosophy they hadn't thought of and finding they can't argue with it. The entrance to the chamber was in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which Harry had suspected since October when Hermione's basilisk research and his own plumbing system tracking had converged on the second floor. The Parseltongue command opened the sink, the pipe below it, the passage down. Ron went with Harry to the transfiguration of the rockfall. There was a cave-in halfway down the passage, and moving 6 tons of rock required more than wand work, and Harry moved it with the efficiency of someone for whom the physical world was a flexible medium, the stone stepping aside with the specific ease of things that have been asked by something that genuinely means the asking. "I'll find Ginny," Harry said. "Then we go out. Together." He looked at Ron. "Keep the passage clear. If anything comes from the castle end, get Hermione and go for help." Ron looked at him. "Don't be dead when I see you again." "I won't," Harry said. "The complete meaning." Ron nodded. Harry went forward alone. The Chamber of Secrets was exactly what it was, ancient, enormous, Slytherin-specific aesthetic sensibility rendered in stone, the long row of serpentine pillars, the carved snakes, the water on the floor that reflected the green light coming from no visible source. Harry walked down the center of it without hurrying, his footsteps steady in the water, and looked at the far end where the great stone face of Salazar Slytherin gazed down from the wall. Ginny was on the floor at the base of it, unconscious, pale as the stone. Harry crossed to her and checked her pulse, present, weak, but present, and put his hand on her forehead. The connection to the diary was still active, a dark thread running from her into the air, and Harry followed it with his attention and found the place where it was rooted and, with the very deliberate application of the thing he'd spent 12 days learning on Olympus, cut it. Not forcefully. Precisely. The way you remove something from a wound carefully, knowing that doing it wrong causes damage that doing it right avoids. Ginny's color came back in increments. Her breathing deepened. She didn't wake up, she'd wake up when she was ready, but the pale, drawn quality of someone being drained left her face, and she looked like herself again. 11 years old, brave in the interior kind of way, returned to herself. Harry stood up and turned around. Tom Riddle was standing behind him. 16 years old and rendered in memory by the diary's power, dark-haired, handsome in the specific, deliberate way of someone who had always understood the utility of appearance, dressed in Hogwarts robes that were 60 years out of date, holding Harry's wand and looking at him with an expression of genuine, careful assessment. "You cut the connection," Riddle said. His voice was a real voice, warm and considered, the voice of someone who had understood very early that voice was a tool. "Without a wand." "I don't always need the wand," Harry said. "And Ginny is, you've stabilized her." Riddle looked at her, then back at Harry. "You prepared for all of this?" "Since last summer," Harry said. "Some of it since before." Riddle turned Harry's wand over in his hand. "You'll need this." "No," Harry said. "I won't." He looked at the wand in Riddle's hand and turned his palm upward, and called it. Not a summoning charm, something more fundamental, something that had nothing to do with wand mechanics and everything to do with the simple fact that the wand was his and he was himself, and the distance between them was a temporary misunderstanding. The wand moved. Riddle's grip closed on it, and it moved anyway, the way water moves through a fist, not violently, not forcing, simply going where it was going. Riddle looked at his empty hand. "I see," he said. "What exactly are you, Harry Potter?" "My mother was Lily Potter," Harry said. "My father is Zeus." Silence, in the chamber, was its own kind of sound. Riddle looked at him with those dark eyes, and Harry looked back, and there was a quality to the moment that was nothing like the chamber with Quirrellmort the year before. That had been a presence that was frantic underneath its patience, desperate underneath its cold, reaching for the stone because it was running out of time. This was different. This was 16-year-old Tom Riddle, the most brilliant student the school had ever seen, who had constructed an actual intelligence inside a Horcrux and was now deploying that intelligence on a problem it hadn't anticipated. "Olympian," Riddle said. "Genuinely. Not metaphorical." "No," Harry said. "Not metaphorical. And the sacrificial magic from your mother?" "Yes." "So contact with you is, yes," Harry said. A pause. "And you're going to call the basilisk," Riddle said, using Parseltongue, "and you're going to fight a 1,000-year-old snake in a flooded chamber with no reliable source of light, because the basilisk's gaze is lethal and you need to close your eyes." "I'm going to call the basilisk," Harry said, "and I'm not going to close my eyes." Riddle stared at him. "The gaze is lethal." "To humans," Harry said. "I'm not entirely human." "You don't know that the divine immunity applies to, I know that direct divine sight is the only thing that can counteract basilisk gaze," Harry said. "I know that Zeus's eyes contain lightning and that I inherited that quality in full. I know that a basilisk's killing gaze works through a mechanism that requires the target to have no comparable force in their visual field." He paused. "I've thought about this carefully. What if you're wrong?" "Then I improvise," Harry said. "But I'm not wrong." He was not wrong. He called the basilisk in Parseltongue, come out, the chamber is awake, there is prey here, come and show yourself," and the water on the floor shivered before the thing appeared, the sound preceding it, the massive scale movement of something that had lived in the dark for 1,000 years and moved like the concept of size made animate. It came out of the wall behind Slytherin's face. 60 feet, possibly more, Harry didn't take the time to measure. Enormous and ancient, yellowed scales in the green light, and those eyes. It opened them. Harry looked back. The eyes of a basilisk were lethal the way a void is lethal, the gaze drew the soul out through the optic nerve and extinguished it, a mechanism that required nothing from the target except the act of looking. Harry looked, and what it found was not a soul it could reach, what it found was a window into something that contained lightning, that contained sky, that was the inherited gaze of the Lord of Olympus meeting a creature that had been made, at its core, from the same ancient darkness that had preceded the age of gods. The basilisk recoiled. Not in fear, exactly, it wasn't fully an emotion in the human sense. More like a fundamental incompatibility, the way water and electrical current interact, neither winning but neither willing to hold the same space. Harry moved. He closed the distance in 3 seconds, the length of the chamber covering under him like ground beneath a storm, and he had the basilisk's fang in his hand from the shed tooth he'd taken from the floor earlier in his approach, old fang, massive, still lethal, and he drove it into the diary, which he'd taken from his pocket. The sound that came from the diary was not a sound for anyone nearby. It was the sound a soul fragment makes when it's destroyed, not the 16-year-old voice, not Tom Riddle's careful intelligence, but something beneath both of those, something that was just the raw dark fact of a murder that had been used to make something that was never meant to exist, coming undone. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then it was quiet. Harry stood in a chamber of secrets with a destroyed diary in one hand and a basilisk fang in the other and a 1,000-year-old snake looking at him from 30 feet away with the specific quality of something that has been freed from a compulsion it didn't know it was under. He looked at the basilisk. The basilisk looked at him. Harry spoke in Parseltongue, "You're free. The one who commanded you is gone. You don't have to be here." A long, considering pause, in the way of things that think slowly but think deeply. "There is nothing beyond here," it said. "This is the only world I know." Harry thought about this. "Then stay or go as you choose," he said. "But don't hurt anyone else." Another pause. "The small one," it said. "She will be well." Harry looked at Ginny, still unconscious, color fully returned. "Yes," he said. "She'll be well." The basilisk moved back into the wall. The sound of it receded. The chamber was quiet and green and ancient and entirely still. Harry went to Ginny, gathered her up with the careful efficiency of someone moving something important, and carried her back toward the passage. She woke up halfway through. She woke up and found herself being carried through a stone tunnel by Harry Potter, and the first thing she said was, "Put me down, I can walk," which Harry considered an excellent sign. He put her down. She walked. Shakily but determinedly, her chin set with the particular bravery of someone who is not going to be carried out of this if they have anything to say about it. "What happened?" she said. "The diary," Harry said. "Tom Riddle. It's over. I was writing in it and then I kept losing time." "I know," Harry said. "It wasn't you. It used you. That's different." She was quiet for a moment. "The basilisk. Handled. The monster in the chamber. Also handled. You," she looked at him sideways. "You just handled it." "Yes," Harry said. "Are you always like this?" "More or less," Harry said. She made a sound that was exhausted and slightly incredulous and, underneath both, genuinely amused. He found he liked her enormously. She was going to be extraordinary when she was older, when she'd had time to grow into all the bravery that was currently more interior than exterior. She just needed time and the understanding that what she was survived tonight intact. Ron was at the rockfall, exactly where Harry had left him. His face when he saw Ginny went through several things in fast sequence, all of them versions of relief, settling finally into the particular expression of an older brother who is very glad his sister is alive and is going to take approximately 3 days to say so directly because the Weasley communication style ran through action before it ran through words. "Ginny," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You look terrible." "I'm fine, Ron." They looked at each other for a moment. Then Ron grabbed her into a hug that was entirely unreserved, and she grabbed back, and Harry stood a few feet away and felt the warmth of it move through the tunnel. They got out. Hermione met them in the corridor above, took one look at all three of them and the destroyed diary in Harry's hand, and said, "Tell me everything." "In order." "In a minute," Harry said. "First, Ginny needs Madame Pomfrey." "I don't need," Ginny started. "You do," Harry said. "You've had a piece of a Dark Lord's soul living in your head for 6 months. Madame Pomfrey. Then I'll tell you everything." Ginny opened her mouth. Closed it. Nodded. Dumbledore met them at the hospital wing. He looked at Harry's face. At the diary. At Ginny, alive and upright. At the basilisk fawn, which Harry was still holding because he hadn't yet found a safe place to put it. At the quality of Harry's composure, the absolute unfrightened steadiness of someone who had gone somewhere very dark and come back clean. The chamber, Dumbledore said. Handled, Harry said. The same word he'd used with Ginny. He didn't choose it deliberately. It was just the accurate word. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the expression Harry had seen building all year, the one that had started in September as recalibration and was now something different, something that had arrived at a destination that the headmaster appeared to find both humbling and necessary. Harry, he said. I owe you a great deal more than an explanation. You owe Ginny Weasley a proper investigation into how a Horcrux made its way into the possession of an 11-year-old first-year student, Harry said. Start there. A pause. You know what it is. I know what all of them are, Harry said. And I know there are more. And I know the one that used to be in my forehead was one, and the one in the diary was one, and when he comes back, and he will, we're going to need to find the rest before the end. So yes. I know what they are. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Now you know that I know. Does that change how this conversation goes? Another long moment. The blue eyes over the half-moon glasses, steady and no longer pretending to be only warm. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. I believe it does. Harry handed him the basilisk fawn, which Dumbledore took with care. There are things I'd like to discuss with you when Ginny is settled and my friends have eaten something, Harry said. The full picture. All of it. Together. Together, Dumbledore said. Yes. Harry turned to check on Ginny, who had let Madame Pomfrey take charge with the resigned cooperation of someone who had given up the argument on grounds of exhaustion. Ron was beside her. Hermione was behind Ron, and her eyes found Harry's across the room with the sharp, particular focus she used when she was about to ask him 14 questions in rapid sequence. He held up one finger. 1 minute. She subsided. Barely. He stood in the doorway of the hospital wing and looked out at the corridor, and through the window at the far end the Scottish night was dark and clear, and the sky above it was doing the thing it had been doing since he woke up in the hospital wing last year, that specific electric blue-black, stars sharp and precise, the atmosphere charged with the restrained energy of something very large that was paying attention. Harry looked at the sky and let himself be seen by it. He thought about Lily Potter and the magic she'd given him. He thought about Zeus and the sky that was home. He thought about Hera and the steel she'd taught him. He thought about James Potter, no wand in hand, choosing to buy time. He thought about Ginny Weasley, 11 years old, returning to herself on a tunnel floor with her chin set. He thought about Tom Riddle, 16, standing in the chamber with his careful intelligence working hard on a problem it hadn't been built to solve, and the look on that constructed face when it understood what Harry was. He thought about Voldemort, somewhere cold, waiting. Not yet. Not yet. But the picture was forming and the pieces were assembling and the key was in his chest and the locks were out there, and every year was another year of preparation for the final shape of the thing. He was not in a hurry. He was also not afraid. He was the son of Lily Potter, who had made love into armor. He was the son of Zeus, who had made the sky and governed it. He was the son of Hera, who had looked at a child in a basket in the rain and made a decision that changed everything. He was Harry. He was Hadrian. He was the boy who had never been broken because he had never been left alone in the dark long enough to break, and the world that had tried to discard him had gotten back something it had never planned for, someone who loved it anyway, who chose it anyway, who walked into its darkest places not from duty but from the simple, sovereign conviction that the dark should not be allowed to win. He turned from the window. All right, he said to the hospital wing, to his friends, to the night and the year and everything still ahead of it. Let's get to work.